Call into order the Tuesday, September 2nd, 2014 meeting of the Township of South Orange Village Board of Adjustment. May we have a roll call?
Yes, Mr. Don.
Here.
Mr. Descala. Here. Mr. Polipiano.
Here.
Mr. Reeves.
Here.
And Mr. Aller.
I'm here. Pursuant to Section 5, Chapter 231, PL 1975, this is to state for the record that adequate notice of this meeting has been provided to the public by posting and maintaining the annual notice of regular meetings on the bulletin board in Village Hall, by publishing the annual notice of regular meetings for 2014 in the December 2013 edition of the South Orange Maplewood News Record, and by filing said notice in the office of the village clerk. First business tonight is approval of minutes for our special meeting on Tuesday, June 24th this year. So why don't we go ahead, get those out. Jetta sent us the track changes. I'll speak for myself. I agree with the revisions. I have no further revisions or suggestions. Does anybody else have any questions?
No, I thought it read very well, considering the complexity of the issues.
So may we have a motion?
Move to accept the minutes as amended.
A second.
Okay, Mr. Aller.
Yes.
Mr. Reeves.
Yes.
Mr. Polipiano.
Yes.
Mr. Descala.
Yes.
And Mr. Don.
Yes.
And we move on to the approval of the resolution for Luther and Hazel Turner at 14 Kigman Road. This was the resolution at our August 5th meeting. And again, there are several revisions tracked in red. I think the best revision was the notation that the subject property is not on the list. That's important.
Right. Mr. Chairman, there were a couple of comments from the board, but the majority of the comments are from applicant's counsel. I thought they were helpful in clarifying some parts of the resolution. There was one comment from applicant's counsel not included here, which was to delete in paragraph 25 everything after the first sentence.
Yeah, well, of course they don't want that in there. Is it, do we normally give the applicant's attorney?
We give them a courtesy copy and ask if they have any input. Hopefully they'll correct any mistakes that I've made and make it clearer, and I think she helped in some respects.
Yeah. Well, look, I agree. When I read that second part there, I said, well, the first sentence says we don't have to address the substantive arguments, and then we go ahead and address the substantive arguments. So it's contradictory. Can you all hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay, sorry about that. I'll try to speak more closely. So, does anybody else have any thoughts about that?
Well, I didn't really mind seeing that last commentary about, our kind of viewpoints. We didn't make a decision on it. We just made some commentary on it, and I think it's worth putting in the record, but I guess it doesn't have to be in the resolution. It's in the minutes.
Any other thoughts? Do you have any particular thoughts on that about?
I can't vote anyway, so.
Oh, that's right. You had to recuse yourself.
There is one other revision in paragraph 25, Mr. Chairman, was the date of the change in the amendment of the land development ordinance lot width requirements. We've since found out it was June 2003.
Yes.
So that would be changed if that sentence remains in the resolution.
Yeah. Look, I would probably just strike it, just because we're not. We said we don't reach the substantive arguments, so why muddy it up? Why give the other attorney a chance to say that we've overstepped what our actual findings were, and, I don't know. It just seems unnecessary. I agree that it expressed what we discussed. We could say, suffice it to say that during deliberations, we considered the substance of arguments and noted that the village's amendment, land use ordinances, blah, blah, blah. Just say we noted.
Okay.
And don't talk about whether we found their arguments unpersuasive. We just say we noted that.
Okay.
And then as far as and I would take out number 2. They know what they had to say. I would just remove number 2.
All right.
Does anybody have any issues with that?
No, that works for me.
And there's 2.
Just comes out.
Let's take out everything after 2.
Okay, so,
The board wants that, make that
Yes.
change? Okay.
so I'll make a motion that we accept the minutes as revised, the current red revisions, changing the yellow from 2005 to 2002, and noting, and striking that we found it unpersuasive, and just say that we noted the ordinance had been changed.
That's the resolution, right?
Resolution.
Yes, that's in the resolution, I'm sorry. So, we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Mr. DeScala,
Yes.
Mr. Aller,
Yes.
and Mr. Reeves.
Yes. I wanted to note, before we proceed on to Seton Hall, that there will be a special meeting for September 30th for Singular Wireless about placing antenna on the roof at 76 South Orange Avenue, where there are already a lot of antennas, in case anybody didn't already know. But that's a special meeting that will be held on Tuesday, September 30th at 7 p.m. Any questions about that from the board? Okay, so then we will move on to the case at hand. Continue. Oh, thank you. I should also note that case 1016, Falafely Yours, it was to be heard for completeness this evening. It has been withdrawn at the request of the applicant. And as far as I know, there's no further upcoming date. That's it, they just withdrew. Okay. So now we move on to Seton Hall. Mr. Coakley.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Kevin Coakley, law firm Connell University. I think you're right. Working now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Before I call any witnesses this evening, I'd like to give you a brief outline of what we expect to accomplish this evening, and start off by addressing the letter that I wrote to the board last week with respect to the investigation by Seton Hall of the condition of the Graves House. And as the members will recall, back at the beginning of this application, specifically on April 29th of this year, the Historic Preservation Commission, in their role as advisory to the board on applications involving historic sites, wrote the board a letter explaining the presentation made by Seton Hall to the Historic Preservation Commission and supporting the application insofar as it included a proposal for adaptive reuse of the Graves House. Over time, Seton Hall was encouraged by the board and made additional efforts to get access to the property, which we discussed, I think, at our hearing in July, and has done a much more thorough examination of the issues with respect to the Graves House. And that examination involved both an engineer and an architect and an estimate of what it would cost to restore the Graves House for the proposed adaptive reuse that Seton Hall had suggested, which was office space. And the reports have come back and are indicative of an extremely high cost, cost that is many times what the value of that space might be. And Seton Hall has had recent experience with respect to rehabilitating different types of office space in South Orange. And so with that information in hand, we provided that advice to the board that we thought that the cost of rehabilitating the Graves House was beyond the utility of the Graves House, and said that we needed to rethink our position about restoring it in that fashion, and suggested to the board that what would be appropriate would be a remand to the Historic Preservation Commission for reconsideration of its advisory opinion with respect to that issue. And so that is our request after we present some limited testimony this evening, which I'll describe in a moment, is that the board, after this evening, adjourn the application without date. We will go back to the Historic Preservation Commission and make an additional presentation to them. Once that has occurred, you will be notified, and we will request another date. We will give notice as if we were starting anew, both by mailing to the appropriate list and publication at that point in time. So that is the general information I'd like to provide to the board. And then we have two witnesses this evening, Ms. Elizabeth Dolan, who testified here previously on July 2nd, I believe it was. There were certain questions asked by board members of her, some of them technical in nature, some of them having to do with did she have information that was not included in her report, that sort of thing. So there's a limited number of items, approximately 5, that she has gone back and researched her files and has addressed in a short cover letter to the board, which we will go through this evening. The other witness that I would call this evening is Mr. Mitch Schuyler. We have provided a report by him to the board, and that is a witness who will testify concerning the operation of the shuttle that Seton Hall plans to run from the university to the Mary Lawn campus and to other locations. So he is someone very experienced in university shuttle operations, and he will testify concerning how that will work. So those are our only witnesses for this evening. I don't anticipate that they will be that long, and we would proceed on that basis.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Copley. I wanted to clarify, if you're going back to the HPC, you don't have a date yet to
No.
meet with them. So conceivably, you could possibly not be coming back in October. We may be waiting till November conceivably. Do you have any prediction on this?
I don't have a prediction. We did copy them on the letter, but we have not spoken to them about a date yet. We would plan to keep in touch with the board about how we're doing with that.
Okay.
Russ, could we get a look at those, the engineer report and the architect's report?
Sure.
I mean, I'm just, you know, to get changes in an application at the last minute just bothers me. I'm just letting you know. This is August 28th, this letter, and this application's been going on for a long time. Also, do we have to wait for the HPC? I mean, the HPC based its letter on the fact that the applicant was going to restore the Graves House. If they're not restoring the Graves House, my guess is that the HPC has nothing good to say about the application. Why do we have to wait for that?
It's a good,
I guess my question to you would be, what are you going to the HPC asking for?
Well, we're going to the HPC to explain, first to explain the situation to them and go over the details.
So that's where you would plan to go over the $6 million estimate?
Initially, and you know, upon their review, I don't know what's going to happen at that hearing, and I'm not positive that it's going to be a negative result, but in any event, it's advisory. It's not a mandatory advice, it's advisory, and that's the law.
So we could proceed and not render a decision until the HPC made its advisory recommendation? Why do we have to hold this up?
Actually, my other question, which is in the same line, is you said you would then come back and proceed as if the application was new. Either the
No, we would
application,
notice, is what I meant. We would notice to the, because
but
this
in
evening-
fact, all the testimony we've had has been about a proposal that included the Graves House, included the concept of administrative offices, 19 parking spaces. Is the assuming the house isn't there, is this a new application, or is this?
No, it would be an amended application. It would be, in terms of the site plan, it'd be a relatively minor amendment. In terms of there'd be less parking, because those spaces would be eliminated. But it's, you know, people or applicants do have a right to amend the application during the course of the application. There would be some adjustment of the testimony vis-a-vis that change in the application, but it would be, I would say, de minimis in terms of the overall nature of the application.
So then why can't we,
Not that I don't mean it's important, but it's...
Right, so then the question would be, why can't we proceed?
why can't we just keep going?
Well, no, you could proceed, but it certainly is more sensible, and I think more in accordance with the law, that the Historic Preservation Commission have the opportunity to address this and give their advice to the zoning board.
I also, I don't agree that we should proceed, because if the application is going to be amended, I'd rather restart with an amended application than keep going on a assumption of an application now that we know is going to change.
look, in fairness to Seton Hall, we asked for them to look more closely at the Graves Mansion, and they did so, and this is what they found out, you know, whether you believe the $6 million repair cost or not, they found out that it was expensive to repair, and so they're reconsidering. I also don't know what the HPC is going to have to say when if they say, well, it's too much to repair, let's say if we want to tear it down, if that's what they ask for, what the HPC is going to say. They're going to say, well, we prefer you not. But so I'm not sure what they're going to get out of going to the HPC, but I'd rather the applicant have their chance to put their best foot forward. There's no rush on us to push this through. I don't see why we have to slam it through. And as a practical matter, they may work out some of the kinks with the HPC so that when they come forward to us with the additional data, it may be a little bit more organized than it is now. So I see no reason to push this thing through, even though I agree the HPC isn't going to offer Seton Hall much. Sal?
Just to be clear, the HPC, the application as it was presented included renovations to the building in which the HPC was asked to provide input, basically, in a review. If the applicant proposes to now tear down this building, they actually have to make an application to the HPC for a certificate of appropriateness to tear down this building. So it's a little bit different.
So it is
than-
required.
Yeah, it would be required. It's a little bit different than
That's right.
asking them to just review the
That's
site
right.
plan application with the restoration of the building. So it's, they would have to make an application for a certificate of appropriateness from the HPC.
Mr.
don't
Coakley,
disagree with
is that what
that.
you're going to the HBC asking for, is a demolition?
I'm sorry.
Is that was my question. So are you going to the HPC now saying, in light of the $6 million price tag to repair this building, we're asking for your approval for demolition?
Well, we initially thought, and I really haven't considered your question, but we initially thought that since we're before this board and they have an advisory obligation, we have a duty to go before them and give them information that would allow them to fulfill that. But that's really the function that we're going there for. Now, there is a separate application process if we were to move forward with an actual demolition permit application, which was correctly outlined. But right now, we're...
So at this
there-
point, you have not, I mean, the letter did not say, in all fairness, right, and therefore our goal is to demolish the building. It didn't say that. But it said the cost of renovating it is so out of line with value that we wouldn't do that. So either you leave it standing as a relic or you tear it down. Right? But is it your intention now to look for approval to tear it down?
We don't have that definitive intention as of yet. We intend to go back to the HPC and present our information to them and then go from there. It may turn out that that is the ultimate outcome of that presentation, and there may be an application for that, but initially we want to go before them and inform them of the facts.
Where, if they do seek a demolition permit, where does that go for approval?
How can they get a demolition permit?
If there
they
was an
don't own the-
application for a demolition permit that was subject to the HPC,
Yeah,
the permit would not
The
issue.
construction code official...
Would not issue until
if there's a-
sent to the HPC.
If there's a finding of a certificate of appropriateness from the HPC, that goes to the construction code official, who
Right.
then issues a demolition permit, which is appealable by law.
But you don't own the Grave Mansion,
No, we don't.
so how can you get a certificate?
Right, well, that's another reason why we have not sought a certificate of appropriateness.
Oh, boy. It's unusual.
It is.
It is.
I mean, I just wonder as well, the value of the testimony. I mean, it's nice to, as you said, there are some questions lingering about traffic and parking that, nice to kind of clean up and answer, but I'm not sure how relevant, given we don't know the ultimate shape of your application, but that it sounds like you're pretty certain it's going to change. I don't know how relevant the testimony is.
Well, I mean, this evening's testimony, well, I guess the description of the shuttle is going to be what it is,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
not going to change
Right.
no matter what. And the traffic testimony is really technical answers to questions that were posed previously.
Are you prepared tonight to present the supporting documents behind the $6 million fee?
We hadn't been prepared to do that, no.
I'd like to get those in advance.
Yeah,
I wouldn't
we
want to
don't- yeah,
just
yeah.
digest them tonight.
Yep, yep.
You said you would be able to forward those documents?
Yeah, we'll be able to provide those, yeah.
Maybe at the same time that the HBC gets it.
Yes.
Any other considerations? So yes, conceivably, things, they may have to present new testimony if that building is no longer there. It could impact the parking, certainly, the placements of parking. We may get new testimony.
They could come for a subdivision application.
Mhm.
I mean, could change substantially their application.
I also think it's worthwhile, Mr. Chairman, since the HPC has reviewed this application, and it is authorized to give its advice to this board, that it be given an opportunity to see whatever the proposed changes are.
The HPC be given an opportunity to see what the,
Right.
well, that, I assume that is required. If they're going to go to the HPC, I'm missing your point.
Not, if it's not a demolition, though, only an advisory opinion. They've already reviewed the application, they've given their opinion, the application is going to change. He's saying that they should go back to the HPC and get the new opinion based on whatever those changes might be. I think that's the proper role for the HPC. I don't think this, in my opinion, the board could go ahead and finish the application, but it would be out of line possibly with what the reality is.
Well, and this is, the Grace Mansion, that's a key contributing property, I believe.
Yes.
So they're required to advise on it in any case. Just have pretty much determined that in the last application. So they would need to advise us, and we
Well, they're authorized to advise on all applications anyway. So.
Yeah. Okay. Am I missing anything? I'm perplexed, but I don't think I'm missing anything. Sal?
If the applicant's going back to the HPC for review of an amended application, then the HPC, as Patrick said, would provide their review and their comments on the application. Mr. Coakley's made it clear that they're not quite sure what exactly they're doing at this point. If they're talking about a demolition, it's a separate application. But if they're just amending the site plan and making changes, then it's really up to the board. You've already referred the application to the HPC. If there's amendments to the application that you feel the HPC should review, you would again forward it back to the HPC.
Okay.
But I think it's still a little unclear right now as to what the options are, what the applicant's really proposing at this point.
Okay. Ms. Gruhl?
I just have a question, just to clarify, which I think I know the answer, but just to clarify. I presume that if there is a modification to this application and that there is a need for additional testimony by your traffic expert and your parking expert, that they would then be made available at any subsequent hearing to address whatever modifications there may be.
That's true.
So it's not tonight and that's the end of it?
No, it's not
I
tonight.
didn't think so, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, so shall we proceed? Yeah.
I think we should proceed with what they're proposing tonight, because it kind of
Right.
ties things up at a point where we don't have people in the middle of their testimony.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. I call Miss Elizabeth Dolan.
Betsy Dolan, you're still under oath.
Yes.
Ms. Dolan, you testified previously on this case, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
All right, and were there a few technical questions that board members asked you about your report that you were here to respond to?
Yes.
All right, and could you just describe what those questions are and what your response is?
Based on the testimony at the last meeting in July, there were a few questions I didn't have backup data with me in order to answer, and I agreed to provide the board with the additional information that was discussed, some of the technical backup to support the analysis that's been submitted and discussed. So I issued a letter dated August 22, 2014, with 5 bullet items. Can you hear now?
Tap on the microphone again.
How about now?
Doesn't sound like it's working.
How about now?
That's,
All right, I issued a letter dated August 22nd, 2014, with 5 bullet points summarizing the information and attachments. The first item discusses worksheets that summarize the individual peak hour. I'm not sure what happened.
Not working.
Try this one? Does this work?
Here we go again. Okay, the first bullet item provides 2 worksheets showing the individual peak hour volumes recorded at each of our study intersections and the balancing that we performed. And I can go through these worksheets in any detail if you'd like, but essentially we recorded the highest consecutive 4 15-minute periods at each location. That would be the individual peak hour for each location. And for example, during the morning, we had at Vos and Montrose, 7:45 to 8:45, which was the same as the peak hour at Scotland and Montrose, but at Stewart and Scotland, the peak hour was 8 to 9 o'clock. But when you look at the volumes between the Stewart and Montrose intersection, northbound and southbound on Scotland Road, there were off by a few vehicles. We took the highest volume and carried that volume back and balanced the volume so that we had a complete set of balanced volumes through the study network system.
So that's what the term balanced means?
Right.
Okay. All right, what was the next one?
The second one was, there was some discussion about how the intersection of Scotland Road and Montrose Avenue is controlled. There's a traffic signal there. And I had explained that we had timed with a stopwatch the red and green phases on both approaches, and that's what we used in our analysis. I was requested to get the signal timing from the county, and that is the third page or third attachment to the study. The ranges of green time that we used in our report do fall within those outlined on the county's signal timing directive.
All right, and is it up to the county to adjust that signal?
It is, but I would also point out that the amount of green time, or maximum amount of green time that is programmed for Montrose is not what we used. It can go up to 32 seconds, and we use 20 seconds. So in our discussion at the last meeting, there were a lot of what-ifs. If the traffic was assigned a little bit differently, if it went around the block to turn left with the signal as opposed to turning left directly out onto Scotland, what would happen, and would we need to modify the signal? Well, in reviewing the signal timing, it appears that more green time can be given to Montrose, so if you did have more vehicles going around the block, that seems to be built into the system, but I believe I also said we're subject to county approval here.
All right, now, items 1 and 2, now that you've researched them, do they change the essence of your report at all?
No, they don't.
All right, so what's the third one?
The third one is a level of service and delay summary comparison table, and I'm not sure if the versions that were submitted actually included that sheet because it was the one Word document versus the other scanned sheet, so I think we have copies to hand out. But what this table specifically provides is a comparison of the levels of service and delay that were calculated in our original traffic study and then in our revised report dated June 19, 2014. This table also provides the no-build condition, which is before we put any of our site traffic onto the intersections.
Just to refresh everyone's memory, you did 2 different traffic studies, is that correct?
That's correct. The first one was dated April 11, 2014, and then we had a revised version dated June 19, 2014.
All right, and what was the principal difference between the 2?
We had met with the board's engineer and planner to discuss the comments issued regarding traffic and to update information regarding, I'm just reading from page 1, paragraph 3 of my revised report. This report includes updated pedestrian count data, revision of the trip generation and future volume projections, and elimination of the Stewart Place driveway. So it was a number of things based on the revised plan and the proceedings of the original first few hearings and staff comments.
All right. And this table that's just been handed out to the board, does it compare the results of the first report with the second report?
That's exactly what it provides, yes. There's a column that is labeled no build, a second column build, which would correspond to the results contained in the April traffic study, and then a build revised, and those columns reflect the levels of service and delay in our June report.
All right. And are the outcomes in terms of levels of service, are they virtually the same?
Yes, they are.
All right. Difference on the lower right-hand corner? BBC?
BB, right, B and B and a C, and that was at Scotland Road, Stewart Place, and the Offset Temple Driveway intersection. How about now? I'm not sure what the problem is. Any better now? How about now?
Now that mic's on. Pick a mic in.
Okay, so the two reports were compared in this table. The levels of service are virtually the same. Is that basically the testimony?
Yes, that is the testimony.
Now going on to the discussion of figures 4 and 5, could you explain that?
Yes, I believe there were some questions about how we distributed traffic. So what I did was I provided markups of our figures 4 and 5 from the June report to show the distribution or assignment pattern of traffic. What it shows is that we oriented about 45% of site traffic to and from the north on Scotland, 40% to and from the south on Scotland, 5% to and from the south on Vos, 5% to and from the east and west on Montrose. So those were the distribution patterns and the resultant total intersection volumes contributed by the Mary Lawn redevelopment at the individual study locations.
All right. And then the last items you discussed is figures 8 and 9. What was that about?
Right. The last two attachments to this letter are figures 8 and 9, and those are marked up to show the volume increase attributed to the development of the Seton Hall Medical School at this location. We summarize the total intersection build volume compared with the no build volume, no build being before we add the site traffic. We show the site traffic as a percentage of the total, and we show that the total intersection volume as a percentage as well. There were a lot of questions about percent increase or percent of the total, so I provided all of those calculations, and basically during the morning peak hour we're at about a 6 to 7% increase in volume at the study locations, and a little bit higher at 7 to 8% during the evening peak hour.
So in other words, at the study location, about 6 to 7 to 8% of the traffic will be generated by the proposed Mary Lawn campus.
That's correct.
All right. And these counts were done after Mary Lawn the high school was no longer operating. Is that correct?
That's right. All of our traffic counts were performed with no activity at the site. There was no driveway activity, and so there's no credit for any activity associated with the former school.
All right. And based on your comparison chart of the levels of service, do you have an opinion as to whether these roads are adequate to handle the increased traffic from Mary Lawn?
The roads can accommodate the redevelopment of the Mary Lawn School for the Seton Hall Medical School. The analysis and revised analysis show that, and as I had testified before, I believe we've provided a comprehensive and also conservative projection of the traffic volumes that may be generated by assuming that all students will come and depart during concentrated time periods, as well as employees coming in and leaving in those peak hours as well.
All right. No further questions.
Mr. Parlapiano.
We're going to hear testimony next about the Jitney schedule.
Yes.
Did you figure any changes to the Jitney schedule into these trip volume?
No, the numbers that I've been talking to tonight are based on I think it was 8 total trips for the Jitney during both the morning and evening peak hours, and that number came from my June report.
Right, so anything we hear in addition to that would be incremental here.
That's right. So if there was a request for further analysis, I've be providing that and, of course, coming back.
And then my second question, just, I think I asked you this last time, I'll ask again just to be clear. Your trip numbers are based on the number of parking spots on the site and the assumption that the only cars coming to site would be those that have parking permits, and therefore don't include any of the possibilities we spoke about in the last meeting of cars coming to site to circulate, looking for space, parking on local streets. Your assumption is the only people coming to site are those that have passes.
That's the analysis, yes.
Right. Thank you.
So this is, when you say build, it's as of what period of time after the building's open for use?
This would be at full operation, full operation of the 365 max students at one time, the full student population, full Graves House population, as well as the faculty and staff. So it would be assuming full operation as the build condition.
So it doesn't take into account any growth of the operation on the site?
That's correct.
I have just a couple, you referred to the trip generation manual, ITE.
Yes.
And of course, that doesn't have a page that says Mary Lawn site.
Correct.
So which charts did you use?
Well, in the revised report, I don't believe we really used any ITE trip generation. We used the number of parking spaces and the staff and employee populations because the ITE numbers don't really correlate. And I know at the last meeting I was asked a few questions. We had looked at using ITE more so to distribute the concentration of arrival and departure in terms of the percentage arrival during any one given time. So it wasn't necessarily using the ITE rate to calculate the number of trips. It was how that trip, how those trips would distribute during the peak hour.
So which ones showed the distribution? I mean, which charts
Okay,
did you use to show the distribution?
We looked at the general office information, which indicates that approximately 45% of employees arrive and depart during the morning and evening peak hours. I'm reading from the bottom of page 6 of my June report. For the original analysis, it was assumed that 65 of the employees would arrive or depart, which is greater than the ITE's 45%. And for this revised analysis, we said that 91 trips have been estimated. So we assumed that all of the employees and faculty would come during 1 hour. So there's really no use of ITE data per se. We referenced it, particularly in terms of the office information, but the trip generation in the revised report is largely based on number of parking spaces for students and number of employees and faculty.
So, but employees and faculty have different rates of trips based on the kind of operation it is. So
Sure.
you can have employees of an office building or employees of a single employer office building. Correct?
Yes.
So which do you use?
Well, again, I'm going back to page 6. It is expected that the 72 medical faculty and staff associated with the medical school will arrive during the morning peak hour and stay throughout the course of the day. Similarly, it is anticipated that the 19 university employees at the Graves House will arrive in the morning and depart in the afternoon. So 72 and 19 is the 91 that I used for the employee trip generation in Table 3 on page 8.
But that's assuming that people arrive and don't leave until they leave for the day, isn't it?
That's right.
But that's not what the IT trip generation manual shows, is it?
Well, the ITE manual shows how office traffic arrives and departs, and it suggests that about 45% of the employees will arrive during the peak hour and depart during the evening peak hour. I've assumed that basically all of the employees will arrive during the morning peak hour and depart during the evening peak hour.
But the trip generation manual also shows the number of trips in and out per person. In other words, if you had a mall parking lot, let's not use that example, but you can have an operation where people go in and out several times during the day,
Of course.
and you've assumed that nobody goes in and out, they just go in and they come out at the end of the day, and that's it?
Well, I haven't looked at what happens during the balance of the day. I've focused on the busiest morning hour, the busiest evening hour, and what happens during the course of the day is expected to be lower than the concentration during the peak commuter hours during the weekday. So there's certainly expected to be activity, students coming and going, faculty coming and going, but what's happening during those non-peak hours is not what's part of the traffic study. And for example, the Graves House, we've said 19 people. If you look at the ITE numbers, they would say that you'd get about 9 trips during the morning and evening peak hours, whereas we've accounted for all of the employees coming in 1 hour.
Okay, so you're focusing on peak hour?
That's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
I got it, thanks.
You're welcome.
On the traffic signal, I'm looking at your, it's handwritten, they gave you the numbers over the phone or something?
No, this is what they
This
sent
is
to
what
me. This is what they
sent
emailed
you?
me.
Okay, so for the traffic on Montrose waiting for a light, I'm sorry, traffic on Scotland waiting to cross Montrose, which column are we looking at, 2 or 4?
2 is the Scotland and 4 is Montrose.
Okay. So what's the total on, so 2 is the traffic that's on Scotland, traveling north and south on Scotland?
That's the timing for the Scotland signals, right?
Okay, and what's the total time for that sequence?
Well, the total signal is 90 seconds, and there's going to be a varying amount of green time on both approaches, depending upon how much traffic approaches on Montrose.
So that has sensors in the road or
Yes.
something? Okay.
And so it varies. And for example, the green time on Montrose will vary from 8 seconds up to 32 seconds, depending upon the demand.
Okay, sensors of some kind that
That's right.
sense the
The detection senses when the vehicles approach, and if there's only one, it'll give 8 seconds, clear out, and give that green back to Scotland. But if there's several, for example, during a time when the train station lets out, it'll max out to 32 seconds.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from members of the board for Ms. Dolan?
So just to confirm, the numbers in your report assume that all, whatever the number is, 100 students are coming during the peak hour in the morning? Because you said you basically assumed everybody's coming during the peak hours, correct?
We use 85%.
Okay, right,
Yeah,
right.
for the students,
Okay.
and 100% for the faculty and staff.
Got it, okay. And I'm getting back to my, and this is not something you can quantify, but getting back to my question that I've been asking, what happens if it's a day when only 70 of the spaces are used because the 30 other people don't have class that day? It just would mean your counts are less, correct?
That's right. We've modeled it assuming that all 101 spaces are going to be occupied, or 85%, I'm sorry, would be occupied during those peak hours, with the students coming in during that peak hour or then departing in the evening peak hour.
Okay.
So that's why I've called it a conservative projection.
Just want to get clarification on the signal timing.
Yes.
What's the timing on the red? I see the greens on here.
Well, they don't provide the red because the red's going to be what's left over, but there is an all red where there's 2 seconds of all red so that all 4 approaches are having red at the same time. But the amount of red that each approach gets is going to be dependent upon how much green time is provided. So there's a total of 90 seconds in the cycle, and the
So
green
it's from
time.
70 seconds for the red down to
Right.
whatever it is, 32 or 48.
Plus or minus. I
Fine.
haven't
Right.
calculated them, but basically, there's going to be a range based on how much demand is on Montrose.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do our experts have any questions?
No.
Sal?
I just have one question. You were asked about growth. So if the school grew, say, by 20%, and there was no increase in parking at the site, would, under the assumptions you've utilized, would there be a growth in traffic?
Well, there couldn't be, because we've limited the trip generation based upon the 101 student parking spaces. So if there were that type of growth, then it would be more activity associated with a shuttle.
Thank you. No further.
Just out of curiosity, I don't know if the site plan allows for it, but there's a possibility, I guess, that students would be dropped off?
By the shuttle?
No, by family members or what have you.
I suppose they could be. I haven't talked to staff about that at all, but I suppose anything is possible.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, do members of the public have any questions for Ms. Dolan? Okay, why don't you come on forward? State your name and address, and speak directly into the microphone, please.
Good evening, Janine Bauer, 416 Clark Street, South Orange. When you refer to your study as conservative, I just want to ask you, you're limiting that characterization to the fact that you've assigned the students arriving, the 85% at peak hour, and 100% of the 72 plus 19 faculty and staff at peak hour. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. But you're also assuming that all the other students who come to the site, so it's over 500 and 365 max at one time, arrive on the jitney.
Right, and my analysis estimated 4 entering and 4 exiting jitney or shuttle trips in the peak hours.
Okay, so your study didn't account at all for the fact that students might arrive some other way, like by parking on streets and walking there, or getting dropped off, or the myriad other ways that they might arrive.
Well, there are certainly other ways. There's New Jersey Transit bus and rail nearby. There's we did talk at the last meeting about the possibility of parking on streets. Since the last meeting, I did inventory, and the majority of streets on the easterly side of Scotland permit parking, whereas the majority of streets in the vicinity of the train station on the west side of Scotland have strict parking prohibitions.
And what are those strict parking prohibitions?
They're generally 2-hour limits, Monday through Friday. Stewart is, I think, 8 to 11, and then it's permitted in the afternoon. But based on my recollection, the majority of them had 2-hour parking limits Monday through Friday.
And did you examine in your study what level of enforcement there was by the police department, either on the west side, relatively unrestricted, or the east side relatively, I forget which one you just said, east side relatively unrestricted and 2-hour parking on the west side?
I've not consulted with the police about enforcement of any of the parking prohibitions.
Did you consult with the parking authority?
No.
Did you consult with anybody about enforcement of parking restrictions?
No.
So actually, the characterization of your study with respect to all the other ways that the parking, the students might arrive on campus, it was rather generous to Seton Hall as opposed to conservative, wasn't it?
Well, I think that the volume projection is certainly conservative. If we did talk at prior hearings about if there's a concern about the parking on the east side where there are few parking prohibitions, then it would be up to the governing body to establish parking prohibitions on that side of Scotland similar to what's on the west side. As to enforcement, that's a local issue and not a Seton Hall issue, but Seton Hall's position is that they want to enforce their parking, and these are adult students who have a little bit more experience in a educational setting than underclassmen, that the parking plan would be worked out such that there was an available shuttle and to make it more convenient for these students. So there's a whole host of things that the applicant's looking to do to minimize any impact, but there's certainly also things that can be done at the municipal level, and if there are existing problems enforcing those parking regulations, as I said, that's not been a part of my study.
And when you say Seton Hall wants to enforce the parking regulations, you're talking about Seton Hall's own parking regulations, is that right?
And particularly as it relates to this Marylawn campus.
Okay. So that would be like the decal or whatever your parking
Decal or
office.
hang tag, yes.
Okay. And how would Seton Hall enforce that?
That's really not a question I can answer, but that would be, they've been looking at different things, such as giving preference to carpoolers and so on and so forth. But the specifics of the plan, I don't have.
Does that plan exist yet?
I don't know that it does exist yet.
And we've been throwing around the terms east side and west side. What is the demarcation for east side versus west side?
I'm speaking specifically of Scotland Road being the north-south division line, and when I'm talking about the west side, that's where the parking prohibitions are posted. There's only a few that I noticed on the eastern side of Scotland, but the streets to the west of Scotland in the vicinity of the site are the ones that I'm speaking of having the 2-hour parking limitations.
Okay, and so that would include both?
Yes.
Does it include Meeker?
Yes.
Does it include Clark?
I don't know if I have my list here now. Just a second. I'm sorry, you said Meeker? Meeker
Yeah.
Street, south of Montrose, 2-hour parking, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., except Saturday, Sunday, and holiday. And I had that south of Montrose and also northbound to the Mountain House Road intersection.
What about Clark Street?
Clark, 2-hour parking, 8 to 6, except Saturday, Sunday, and holiday. And then I have another notation for another block south with 2-hour restrictions to both sides.
Okay. Do you know how long it takes to walk from, for instance, Clark Street up to what would be the site of the Seton Hall Medical School?
I haven't walked it.
Do you have a general idea of what it takes to walk about 3 blocks?
I walk all the time. The one thing I did look up since our last meeting is what is considered a recognized or standard walk to a commuting point. That would be a half mile. So you could walk a half mile easily in 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Walk half mile in 10 minutes, and 3 blocks is less than half a mile.
Depends on how long the blocks are.
Sure, but consider these regular blocks, not like New York City Avenue blocks, but street blocks.
I don't know what the point of the question is, because you could be walking from any point on Clark or any of these other streets, so I'm not sure what the question is.
Well, the point is, if you could walk half a mile in 10 minutes, you could probably walk 3 blocks in 5 minutes, right?
Again, depending upon how long the block is, sure.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We have other questions.
Bob Chandross, 108 West Montrose Avenue. Just for your own information, you might want to find out how much of the faculty are going to be full-time. Because at Seton Hall, in general, most of the faculty are adjuncts, and therefore they don't teach full-time. And secondly, college faculty members rarely arrive early in the morning unless they have a class at that time. They don't like to get up early. Now, with regard to parking, my understanding is that almost every street in the vicinity of the Maryland property, while not signed, does have a 2-hour parking limit. And, Janine, I think you can verify this, whether or not it's correct. But I believe that's what the municipal ordinances say. There aren't signs, but that is a fact.
Okay, let's have a question here.
All right, my question is, are you aware of how bad the behavior of Seton Hall students right now is regard to South Orange parking regulations?
Mr. Chairman, I object to the
Yeah,
question.
she didn't give any kind of testimony about bad Seton Hall. I mean, I don't like to interrupt, but that's just off point.
Well, you're implying that Seton Hall, the new students, you're implying, maybe you can explain to me, that they would prefer to drive to the campus, drive up to possibly the top floor of a parking structure, wait for a bus, take the bus over, pay several $100s a year to park. You've said nothing about the cost of the jitney, whether that will be free or what, as opposed to just parking on the street and walking 3 or 4 blocks.
Mr. Chairman, again, these questions are not for this witness.
Oh, no, I believe it is, because she talked about the jitney, and I'm saying that she's implied that everybody's going to go by the jitney.
She's assumed that, sir.
She has admitted to that. She assumed that. She said as much. Other than the 100 students that are in the, have parking permit, the other, how many students she assumes will go via jitney.
Well, how
She
much
said
are they
that.
going to pay for the jitney?
And that's not her area of testimony.
She hasn't considered that. She hasn't considered the cost of parking on the campus. She's just assumed that everybody will blithely follow this rule, go to the campus, waste 20 minutes to get to the medical school, rather than just park on the street.
That's her assumption. If the board accepts testimony that's been given or will be given, the board will agree with that assumption or not.
Well, maybe I'm asking...
I don't mean to take the chairman's role, but I think
Yeah,
the
look,
question's unfair.
Look, she's answered the question. Yes, that is her assumption. Whether you believe it or whether we believe it is another matter. But we're here to ask questions. We're not here to
All right,
to
well, I've
argue
asked her,
right now.
what happens if you change that assumption?
Which assumption, sir?
About students following the rule to go to the campus, wait for a bus, and take the bus.
She assumes that there will be 101 students parking. She said that over and over. How many times would you like her to say that?
I'd like her to say what happens if they don't want to go to the campus and they do want to park on the street.
She's also addressed that. There needs to be parking restrictions.
So she's assuming the village is going to be the bad guy.
That's not even a question.
Well, then I'm sorry, this is pointless exercise.
Sir, it's the way we try to get through the evening, is you have to ask questions. Everybody will have an opportunity at the end, after all the experts have given testimony, to present your skepticism, your concerns, things that you don't think were addressed. You will have that opportunity to do that. But if we have everybody coming up here arguing or making statements, we'll never get through the application. It won't happen. So I'm not trying to cut you all off. I'm trying to make it practical. Okay, who's next?
My name is Cedric Cranko, 104 Scotland Road. I didn't hear any, excuse me, I didn't hear any discussion of the route that the jitney would
Okay, you
take.
need to,
They can't hear you.
I'm getting the high sign with the flashlight, which means you need to speak right into the microphone.
I didn't hear any direction that the jitney would take. What route would it follow?
The next witness will testify about that, sir.
Okay. And did you do any studies about the intersection of Scotland Road and South Orange, the avenue?
No.
Do you know where the majority of the students would be coming from, which direction?
We had estimated, as I said earlier tonight, 40% from that direction.
Okay, and the peak hours, can you be a little bit more specific about the exact times?
Well, on Scotland, in the direction that you're talking about, in the vicinity of Stewart, it was 8 to 9 a.m. and 4:30 to 5:30 p.m.
Okay. And you said there would be about 4 shuttles?
That's what I used in my analysis, 4 inbound and 4 outbound during those peak hours.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
If anybody else who wishes to ask questions of the witness.
My name is Michel Douillon, and I'm at 16 Harrison Court. And you made an assumption that people would be going to the campus to use the jetty to get to the new medical school. My question is, what did you base that assumption on?
Based on the proposal that the applicant has developed in working with the project team and in recognition of the number of parking spaces that will be provided on the property itself.
So what you're saying, people are going to go to the campus, wait for a jetty, and your assumptions were just based on a projection of the number of parking spaces?
No, the numbers that we've used in the analysis assume that 101 spaces are available for students, that those will be the students that drive to the subject area. The balance of the students will go to the main campus and take a jitney, or perhaps come on a train or bus or other mode of transportation. But basically, we've assumed that the jitney is going to travel between the Mary Lawn site and the main Seton Hall campus, making 4 trips to and from or back and forth during those peak hours.
Okay. 4 trips meaning peak hours between 7 a.m. and...
Well, let's say 4 in and out between 7 and 8, and then another 4
Well, I don't
in
want to
and
say
out.
let's say, I want to be specific because I live in the area and there are no parking restrictions on the block that I live on. And I'm extremely concerned that there's going to be a lot of parking on my block, which is going to restrict me and my guests from parking in front of my house. So I don't want you to assume that anything. I want to know what you plan to do. If you're presenting a proposal, it should be specific.
The next witness will be addressing the specifics of the shuttle system.
But you didn't answer my question.
You just made a statement. I'm not sure what question there is now.
No, my statement was to me living in the area, but, I'm asking you, based on your assumption, you're saying the number of parking spaces is 101. What's the total student population?
560.
I'm sorry?
560.
So you're saying that 459 are not going to have parking spaces, are going to take the jitney?
Well, they're not all there at the same time.
Well, how many do you assume are going to be there at different times of the day?
Well, the maximum number that we've talked about is 365, I believe.
So 365 less 101 means 264 people are going to be looking for parking spaces, or you're assuming that those 264 people are going to be taking the jitney?
That's the assumption, yes.
But how do you get that assumption? My question is, how are you making that assumption?
I think she answered the question. She took the applicant's, if I may, she took the applicant's word saying the other students will be coming via jitney. She didn't question that. That is a premise. Whether that premise is reasonable or not is another matter, but that she answered the question.
Or that there would be carpooling, because
Or
that's
that there
been
would be
discussed too.
carpooling.
Giving preferential consideration for parking pass for carpooling.
All right, and are there any assumptions for the streets that don't have any restrictions?
That's been discussed a few times now. If there is a concern with that, then it would be up to the governing body to pass an ordinance to have the parking prohibitions posted, similar to the way they are on the other side of Scotland Road.
So in other words, people that live there would be affected also because of, these new parking restrictions?
I don't know how the residents on the west side handle it, but there can certainly be residential parking permitted and otherwise 2 hours, but that is not something that we have studied, nor is it something that's part of this application.
Do you feel that's something you should study? I mean, because the residents are going to be affected, and you're directly affecting their livelihood.
Well, not when the position of the university is that the students who aren't driving to the Mary Lawn campus will use a shuttle. That's the proposal.
Okay. All right. No further questions.
I'm Regina Dudkowski, and I too live at 16 Harrison Court in South Orange. And I want to make a statement and a recommendation.
This isn't a
Sorry,
statement, Tom.
we're not going to take statements. We have questions for the applicant. You will have.
Okay, I'll form this into a question. The assumptions that went into the evaluation of traffic and parking, I think were very optimistic. Is there any plan to maybe take a more pessimistic approach to looking to see what would happen if more than 101 students drove to the facility at any one time? Like what would happen if 50% of them would drive? Isn't it realistic to maybe take a more realistic approach as opposed to a very, very optimistic approach?
We could certainly study any scenario that is requested by the board and its consultants. We could study any number of scenarios, but what has been presented is the original analysis, which was then made more conservative with higher numbers based on consultation with the staff and from comments that were raised at the first few hearings and the revised site plan. So the numbers have gone up, and I think we talked at the last meeting, if they went up by a few more shuttle trips per hour, in my opinion, that wouldn't change the results of the analysis. If we were asked to analyze what would happen if you had a couple of hundred people trying to circulate through the area, I think we can all conclude without a formal analysis that that would be an undesirable situation and certainly not something that Seton Hall wants or the residents want. And we are putting forth a proposal so that we don't have that type of negative impact.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening. My name is Alyssa Aronson. I'm a longtime resident. Have you spoken to Sherryfield Israel to manage the overflow in their parking lot?
I think there was testimony about this at the last meeting. I didn't, but representatives of the university did.
And what happened?
Again, Mr. Chairman, I think this is a little bit off the point.
Yeah, there was testimony given, and if I may, and it wasn't from Ms. Dolan, so you're asking a question that she can't answer. But I will tell you that the testimony basically said Sherry Tafilo had no definitive parking to share with Seton Hall. That was essentially the answer.
Well, isn't that the solution?
Well, it's not a solution if they don't have the parking.
They have a whole lot.
Okay, that was their answer.
Okay.
You have any? Okay. You have other questions?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, as long as you speak right into the
Okay. Sandra
microphone
Keurig,
like I'm doing
105
right now.
Sandra Keurig, 105 North Ridgewood Road. I have a couple questions. One, did your estimate is conservative. Did you incorporate visiting professors into any of this? Because I know a lot of the classes have visiting professors.
No, there have been accommodations on site for visitor parking, but we didn't specifically include visitors in the peak hour projections for analysis.
Okay. Or people coming on for meetings or things like that.
No, again, I would think that would tend to be off-peak, but we didn't account for anything other than the specifics that I've testified to, the faculty staff, the Graves House employees, and the students that would park.
Okay, because I know there are a lot of visiting professors that come through the program.
Right, and as I said at the last meeting, there's many variables, and we're assuming that the staff is all arriving at one time or departing at one time, when in reality, I think one of the other members of the public may have said, you have some adjunct professors, you have people coming and going at different times, but we've loaded up those peak hours for the purposes of analyzing what would happen if everybody pretty much came at once.
Right. And I'm not sure if you're testifying on the shuttle or is there someone next, but my question is, have they looked at the current shuttles that you run are much smaller than it sounds like what you're proposing as far as occupancy? And also, I would like to see how much those shuttles are actually used to see if that would correlate with possible usage of
The
the
next
shuttle.
witness will discuss size and type of shuttles, routes, and all those things.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, while we're waiting for the next witness, there was one question, Ms. Dolan. You said that your understanding is that there's 265 seats in the building?
No,
300?
365
is the maximum.
365 is the max? Okay, because there have been different figures.
265.
No, 365 is the number that we've consistently used. So perhaps I misspoke earlier, but it should be 365.
365 seats?
At maximum.
Just to be clear, that's classroom seats.
Yes.
It doesn't include the cafeteria or the library.
Okay. Okay. So who do we have next?
Hello. How you doing? My name is Janet Scrobe. I'm at 425 Vos Avenue. I'm across the street from what they want to develop. Going through the report, I had a couple of questions.
Okay.
I see references to cars, pedestrians. What kind of accounting was there for bikes?
If there was a bike, they're usually tallied on the count sheet. We specifically separate the pedestrians and we count heavy vehicles. I don't recall there being any notation about bicycles.
Okay, so you would count them if they went by?
If they went through, yeah.
Okay. Does the town or Seton Hall have any plans, or is there anything in the master plan? I know there's a lot of, has been a lot of talk in different towns, especially this being a college town, on promoting bicycle usage.
We haven't made any projections. There may have been a request for a bike rack, those type of accommodations, which is typical in applications these days, but there's no specific reference to bicycles in any of my studies. And as I said, if there were existing bikes traveling through the intersections when we counted, we would have counted them.
Did you request from the town any plans that they might have for promoting bike riding?
No, I haven't looked into that at all. I have had some consultation with the board's professionals, but we haven't gone into bike discussions at all.
Any request on the county level?
Not that I've made, no.
Okay, because from reading, there are things that are out there, and I was wondering if you had taken any of that into consideration.
I'm not sure if the village has any specific plans. I haven't looked into that.
Okay. Did you request from the police department any incidents of accidents, pedestrian vehicles?
No, we did not perform an accident study.
Okay. So this report does not consider anything at any time that might have occurred as far as accidents?
That's correct. We did not review accident reports for the study locations.
Okay. The traffic path and patterns of adjacent facilities around this site, do you know what other facilities there are that might include children?
Well, I guess across the street at the temple, I think there's a daycare operation. I know there's schools nearby, but again, any of the pedestrian activity that was out there, we counted twice, because first we counted during the winter. So we've made no specific count of or assessment of operations of land uses in the area. We've counted the total activity in terms of pedestrians and vehicles going through our study locations.
At those specific times?
Yes.
Okay. So Sherry Tafilo is on one side, so any of their traffic patterns then were not considered in this?
Well, they were considered in the traffic counts that we performed from 7 to 9 and from 4 to 6 or 6:30. So we counted their driveway on Scotland because it's pretty much opposite Stewart Place. So we did count during those periods what was entering and exiting their driveway.
Are you aware if that's when the daycare operates?
I had looked at that on the website at one point, so it was, yeah, and I know I got stuck in the queue on their property at one point, so I knew there was a daycare operation.
Okay, that had impact. Were there any considerations as far as holy days for the temple on Friday when traffic is exiting and entering, Saturday?
No, we didn't make any specific studies of those types of events or holidays.
Okay, so anything around that, we would assume there would be a
That's an
bump.
existing condition, and it's going to happen every year on the holidays, and it's going to create its own parking and traffic
Right, but
impact.
not just the holidays, on Fridays and Saturdays.
No, we studied the peak, morning and evening peak hours, typically called the rush hours or the commuter hours, when we expect to be having our busiest driveway activity.
What were the 2 days that you studied?
I'm sorry?
What were the 2 days? I thought I just saw it.
Of the traffic counts?
Yeah, of when you did the studies. I thought one was Tuesday, I don't recall the other.
Performed manual turning movement counts from 7 to 9 and 4 to 6:30 on Thursday, December 5th, 2013, and Wednesday, December 11, 2013. And then there was an update in May, Thursday, May 15th, 2014, from 7:30 to 9 and 4:30 to 6.
So no, there was nothing done on a Friday?
There was no, our office didn't count anything on a Friday.
Okay. Are you aware that there's a daycare on the opposite, catty corner, I guess you would say, to the properties that we're talking about?
I don't recall seeing that.
Okay.
The only one I know of is at the temple across the street, across Scotland Road.
So there were no traffic patterns there considered?
Again, we counted everything. We counted all the activity. So whatever locations or facilities are generating traffic, that traffic's included, but we didn't count specific driveways other than the Temple driveway and the driveways for the railroad station because they're right opposite the site as well.
Okay. And then it was the four corners. So any traffic or pedestrian traffic that occurs from the train station, which typically when people come home from the city, they do not cross at the corner, which I think they should, but they don't. They cross over the, I want to say, the hump of the bridge. So none of that would have been counted.
No, we counted what was happening, the crossings at the intersection, in that case at Montrose and Vos.
Okay. Also looking in the report on page, I think it's page 6, it references 54% of the current daytime medical students have parking passes for Seton Hall. My understanding that the students were also going to facilities that are off campus,
Yes.
off from Seton Hall?
Yeah, the dean had talked about that to some degree, explaining the nature of the operation, which some of the students will be on campus a few days for classes, some of them will be off-site at other locations, and some of them, as I believe I recall, during certain semesters, they'll be just off campus altogether.
Right,
So
but your source for looking at the parking says 54% park.
That's a fact that we had been provided with, but it doesn't really come into play in the analysis. I'm not finding it right now in my report, but if that's the number that they gave us, we didn't do anything with it other than notate it in the report.
Okay, because I'm thinking that also if people are going to other facilities that aren't on Seton Hall, all those people have cars. Okay, so as far as the traffic report, as far as, let's say, fact-finding or initial review of the student population, I don't know if I'm coming across, were there any questionnaires given to the students that go to this school, this proposed university campus that's not going to be on the campus, as to how they travel or intend to travel?
No, there were no specific student.
Am I coming across? Because I don't, okay, I just don't hear it.
There are no specific student surveys. What information we have is information from the existing class loads on the main campus and how the students, how their classes are scheduled on and off campus. So that activity is happening now. It's just that some of it would be transposed over to the Mary Lawn site and no longer be happening at the main campus.
But there's no documentation supporting that from the students themselves as to how they would be.
The documentation is the existing schedule and class loads, a number of faculty and so forth, combined with the capacity, seating capacity that will be available at Marylawn. Those are the facts that we've used in developing the information that's been conveyed in these meetings.
For the proposed application, were you requested to do any sort of I want to say a snip in time as far as this is what it would look like at 8 o'clock in the morning, how full the lot would be, what the traffic pattern would like. This would be at 9 o'clock, this would be at 10 o'clock.
Well, there's a memo from Seton Hall appended to my report that shows that in terms of the classroom activity, but again, from a traffic engineering perspective, we're not suggesting that there won't be activity throughout the course of the day, but what we're looking at is the busiest hours, because we know if the traffic can be handled during those busiest hours, then all other hours there will be less traffic, and so the intersections will operate better than those time periods that we've analyzed. So we've not been asked to look at parking variation throughout the course of the day. We've been asked to revise the report, and that's the report we're talking about now.
Okay. Have there been any visitations, since there's sort of a mirror in Cherry to Philo, and I don't recall how many spaces are in the lot, but at times of holiday or Friday or whatever, you get a sense of the traffic and the capacity in the area, and I think that lot, I think the traffic is less than what's being proposed in the proposed application for this lot.
I can't say because I haven't studied it. I know the holidays are coming up again, but we've not studied it. And typically, you don't, for example, design for those peak loads. It's recognized that those are heavily attended events, regardless of what house of worship it may be, or it's similar to shopping center parking at Christmas. You don't
No, but
necessarily
there's a
design for that.
capacity that they can accept an amount of cars that will converge on the neighborhood at that time. That happens periodically. And then this would be another facility that is proposing that they converge on the neighborhood and frequent the neighborhood.
This is kind of well beyond the scope of the
I'm talking about the traffic study, and I'm talking about things that are in the report.
I mean, she was called back to answer specific questions that board members posed to her. She addressed those questions, and I think many of these questions have gone far afield of that testimony.
Honestly, I don't know what question you're asking right now. I've lost you. What question you're asking?
There is...
Ask Ms. Dolan a question based
There
upon her
is
testimony.
basically a test tube sample in having Sherry Tafilo across. And if one is doing a traffic study, have you looked at the conditions that exist there and converge on the neighborhood at that time?
No, I've answered no, and the reason is because their time frames of peak holiday or other service activity don't coincide with the peak hours that we're
That's
studying.
not my question.
Well, that's my answer.
She said no, ma'am. That was the answer.
I
No.
think you've asked the same question twice now, at least as I'm understanding. That's the way they're understanding it, too. So either we're stupid or you're not making yourself clear. And I may be stupid, but you're asking the same question twice, as far as I can tell.
I guess what I'm trying to get across is there are assumptions being made as to what will occur in this lot. And across the street, there is a lot that exists that has a similar circumstance, which seems to me that if you were doing a traffic study, you would go see how that acted and how it impacted.
So you just asked the question, did you study this, and she already answered that if,
Okay,
to
so
the
then that
extent that
question
during
is
peak
done.
hours,
Okay.
if Sherry Tafilo was operational during those peak hours, that would be included in the traffic volume studies. Question answered. She answered.
No, that's not the question.
Or she actually
Not
answered
if
the
it's
question.
simultaneous.
She answered the question, no.
Okay.
But she didn't look at that.
She didn't look at it.
Right.
But my question wasn't simultaneous activity. My question was activity unto
Right.
itself. I
Right.
want that part clear.
Right.
With the frequency of traffic, or I guess my other question I asked, did you go to the county in reference to the amount of cars that are being proposed for Scotland Road?
We will have or do have a county application. I haven't been involved in that process, but there will be a county planning board application, yes.
Okay, so that's happening now, or that happens
I don't know. I'm not
simultaneous?
handling it.
Okay. And then, is there any impact on pedestrian traffic with the increase in cars and needing crossing guards or additional lights on corners? Does that have an impact on those corners?
The analysis has shown that there are not any improvements required as a result of the traffic added by this proposal. So we're not proposing to change the traffic light, especially now that we've got the timing directive from the county. There are not any proposals for modification of roadways or any new traffic signals.
Okay, but I guess I'm saying legal-wise, do schools, is there any
If there were a
statute that covers, needing a guard at a certain frequency of
I don't believe we're
cars?
expecting that level of pedestrian activity at this location.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
One additional question. Your analysis states that it's a present analysis, but your hypothesis suggests that there could be a 20% growth rate. Can you tell me what your plans are on how to accommodate this 20% growth rate and what the university plans to do to accommodate this excess of 80 people?
It was my understanding that the dean testified that he couldn't get that type of an increase based upon the limitations on the facilities and some other things that I don't recall, that a 20% increase wasn't likely. But as we mentioned earlier, if there was that type of increase in the student activity, our current plan only has 101 parking spaces allocated for students to use. So the trip generation is based on those 101 spaces plus the anticipated faculty and Graves House occupancy. So because we've based the trip generation on maximum use of the parking supply on site, if there's some growth, that's going to have to be accommodated by additional shuttle service.
So my question then, there's no analysis of additional parking or any expectation of how you would handle any growth?
She just answered the question on how she would handle growth.
It's going to be handled by the Jitty service. That's their
Correct,
assumption.
that was her answer.
Okay. Is that assumption reasonable, that the Jitty service is just going to pick up the excess?
That's for us to decide.
Okay.
I'd like to piggyback on Janice Grove. Did you study the Montrose School on East Clark Street, where the buses will be coming
You
and
need to
going?
speak into the microphone.
Oh, I'm sorry. Have you studied the Montrose School on East Clark Street?
No, as I've discussed during my testimony, we have studied the intersections essentially surrounding the site. So we've not gone and made any specific studies of other facilities or locations outside the immediate surroundings of the Marylawn property.
Hello, Sharon Pigeon, 412 Bose Avenue. I think I heard you say that the impact to the area during peak hours is somewhere in the 6 to 8% range. Is that correct?
That was the increase in overall intersection volumes attributed to site-generated traffic.
Just on the peak times?
Yes.
Do you have any estimate as to what the change to the area would be on the other hours?
Again, as a traffic engineer, we look at those peak hours. There's certainly going to be more activity, but what we're looking at is the concentration of combining the existing street activity and the commuter parking lot and the temple activity with the peak Marylawn. So that's the
Right.
analysis
So
we've done.
overall, certainly during the peak hours, there's the biggest amount of activity, but it's perhaps a small change to the area. Whereas, is it fair to say that during the rest of the hours during the day, it might be less volume overall, but it could be a very large increase over, a percentage increase over what's currently there? Is that fair to say?
It could be. I don't have any projections or existing volumes to address that.
Thank you.
No other questions? Okay. So, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We're going to take about a 5-10 minute break right now, and we'll be back to continue with the next expert. Thank you. Okay, we're back in session now with Seton Hall. We'll be calling their next expert witness. I wanted to ask the members of the public to please avoid repetitive questions so we can move along efficiently. And I'll leave it at that.
Right, just one housekeeping matter. The table that we passed around with Ms. Dolan's testimony, I don't think that was previously provided to the board, so if I might have that marked as A11.
Oh, that's
Yeah, the level of
the
service.
level of service. A11. Okay, and also, again, if there's anybody who's come in late, when the time comes for you all to ask questions of the witness, they are questions. Everybody will have time at the end of this application to speak your mind about what you think about the application, offer your opinions, criticisms, or approvals, but that's not for this evening.
Okay. My next witness is Mitch Schuyler.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you'll give at this board is the whole truth?
I do.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Mitchell Schuyler, 10590 Sugarcrest Avenue.
Got to really talk into that microphone. Take it out of there if you can.
Take it out.
Yeah.
Mitchell Schuyler, 10590 Sugarcrest Avenue, Johns Creek, Georgia.
Thank you.
Mr. Schuyler, let's just go back to your professional accomplishments. Where did you have your undergraduate degree?
State University of New York at Binghamton.
All right, and did you have take any master's courses after that?
I did. I got my master's in business administration at the University of Buffalo.
All right, and what was your first position in the transportation business?
I was the Director of Business Development and New Customer Design for Cognisa Transportation in Atlanta, Georgia.
All right, what kind of company was that? Is that?
That was a bus contractor, company that provided buses, drivers, maintenance, insurance, and provided transportation to and from different areas.
All right, and after that position, what did you do?
And then in 2007, I started Solstice Transportation Group, which is a company that specifically provides consulting in transit operations, primarily for the university marketplace, but we also do private and municipalities as well.
All right. And can you give the board some examples of the type of work that you've performed regarding transportation for the university marketplace?
Yes, absolutely. We've done a variety of different things. From Harvard University, we've done some technical analysis on transit technology to much broader scope types of studies, like at the Louisiana State University, LSU. We did a study to help them transition from a public entity to a private contractor. We've done work for Auburn in Alabama, where we've done parking and transit analysis there. We've done work at the University of Chicago, where they were looking to reduce their costs while increasing service in some specific areas. And some of the other examples, we have many more, but some of the others here locally, we've done work at for a private company at Secaucus Junction, the exchange at Secaucus Junction, doing a transit analysis where they're connecting to the public transit system, New Jersey Transit, and Princeton University. We did a transit study and feasibility plan there.
All right, and when you say you've done these transit studies, do they generally involve the on-campus transportation of students?
They do.
All right, and do they involve shuttles such as we're going to discuss this evening?
They do. They involve different size shuttles for different areas. They'll be on campus, off campus, late night, to remote locations, a combination of things.
All right, and The function of your company is to lay out a means of operating that shuttle?
We do. We provide very specific operations consulting, which includes which shuttles to use, the capacities that you need, the frequency. Sometimes we look at different versions of the routes, and we also talk about different specifications if you're going to outsource or run it yourself.
All right, and the Secaucus Junction you mentioned, what kind of operation is that?
That was a small shuttle bus operation with between 2 to 3 buses, but it was to provide transportation to the from the Secaucus Junction property, it's a residential property, to the Frank Lautenberg station on the New Jersey Transit, determine the capacity needs and times.
All right. And can you think of any university work that you've done that's similar to what you've done for Seton Hall?
I think Princeton is a good example. While theirs was a little more expansive in what they were looking to do, they were looking at their entire system, which includes connecting to Princeton Junction for public transit, but they also had remote campus applications, which several universities do, and they do onto their Forrestal campus, which is required for several students, and I found that very similar to the work here.
All right. So I'd like to offer Mr. Skyer as an expert in the field of on-campus university transportation for students.
Okay, do we have any questions for Mr. Skyer about his expertise?
And let me amend that. When I said on-campus, I don't mean directly or limited to on-campus, but campus-based.
Okay.
Could you go over again what you did at Princeton?
At Princeton University, we were tasked with putting together a transit plan to look at the number of buses they needed to meet their 4 to 5 different route services and different peak times. It was a feasibility study and an analysis on that plan. And then to look at their remote campuses, they had some remote locations, and we looked at what type of service and how to communicate that with the students.
And when was this?
I believe it was, I can't remember exactly, I believe in 2009 is when I did that, 2009 to 2010.
And did they implement your recommendations?
They did.
Could you state again your undergraduate degree? You said your graduate degree was in business?
A Master of Business Administration, yes.
And your undergraduate degree was?
Dual major in History and Law and Society.
Okay, so where does your transportation experience or training come from, I should say? You know you run a company that does transit service planning, but where does your experience come from to take that role?
Well, the experience was developed we were providing the transportation service, so it's operational transportation service that we delivered. So we were providing the buses, the transportation, the drivers, the maintenance, those types of things. So for 5 years, my role was to develop the new customer experience, which included identifying the buses, going to the bus factories, bringing that information back, and determining which equipment we would propose and how we would implement it. And my role expanded up until the day we started service, and then in some cases helping with the beginning of service till it turned over to the on-site operations.
And I'm sorry, for which entity was that?
That was for Cognisa Transportation.
Say that again?
COGNISA, Cognisa.
And they're an operator of bus services?
They were until they were purchased, yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then after you left Cognita, is that the name?
Cognisa.
Cognisa. In, I believe you said 2007?
Correct.
Is when you started your own consulting company?
Yes, I took the information and the knowledge I had gained, and I turned it into a consulting company, and from there, we've developed several different transportation plans and a strong focus on designing specifications for transit services, especially for contracted services.
Right.
And we've done about, I think, between 12 and 18 of those, depend on how extensive they were.
And do you operate any services now?
We do not provide any operations.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions? Any objections? Okay, so we recognize you as an expert in campus-based university transportation.
All right. Now, when were you contacted by Seton Hall for this assignment?
Approximately 6 weeks ago.
All right. And what did you do in preparation of coming up with an analysis of how this problem might be dealt with?
The first thing we did was we conducted a discovery call with the principals at Seton Hall. They explained to us the situation, what they were trying to accomplish and their goals, and then they provided us with a significant amount of data that showed what the information they did have about their expectations for the usage of the Maryland campus based on maximum capacities of students who would be attending classes at different time periods.
And did they tell you that they wanted a design for a very efficient shuttle system?
They did. They wanted an efficient shuttle system that would be effective for the passengers and meet the demand, given that there was a very limited parking for students there.
All right, and so after that discovery call, what happened next?
From that point, we started doing our analysis, which we broke down the estimated demand for passenger transportation based on taking out the potential parkers, and we only estimated that one person per car would come, even though that there's an opportunity for carpooling. So we wanted to have the maximum potential need for the transportation, and then we looked at the different periods of time, looking at peak and off-peak periods, and trying to put together an analysis of when people would be coming, and then made some assumptions on how long that they would remain on campus and when they would have to depart.
All right, and so with all of that information, did you come up with a sort of a general plan for how Seton Hall should provide this shuttle service?
We did. We came up with a general plan that estimates for most of the day to have 2 buses running on a 30-minute cycle. That's 15 minutes each way. That would cover most of the period of the period of the schedule. And then we recommended a tripper bus, which is a bus that would add, in this case, 3 or 4 hours per day for the peak periods to anticipate higher demand, to continue to provide excellent service, especially when you have a rush of passengers wanting to go at the same time for some of your larger classes.
All right, and can you tell us more about the overall plan that you devised?
Yes, the plan runs from approximately 6:35 a.m. to 9:10 p.m. Monday through Thursday, with some peak periods from 7:15 to 11:45 on Monday through Wednesday, 9:45 to 2 p.m. on Thursday, and 10:45 to 2 p.m. on Friday. Friday service, the main primary service, would run from about 6:50 a.m. to 5:55 p.m. on Friday. That anticipates some time for the students to arrive on campus at Seton Hall and the main campus, to take the trip down we estimate between 11 and 15 minutes, take the 15-minute trip and be there before classes start. And our goal was before the peak classes to have at least 2 trips within a reasonable 30 to 40-minute period of time. So you could take one at about 35 minutes and one at about 15 or 20 minutes before those classes.
All right. And where would the students depart from on campus?
They would depart from the parking deck, the main parking deck on Seton Drive.
All right. And did you look into routes to Marylawn?
We did consider some alternative routes, but our primary focus when we did look at the different options was to remain on streets that are typically used for this type of operation. We wanted to limit the use of primarily residential streets wherever possible, and we also wanted to incorporate the transit station downtown, because New Jersey Transit Station, because that could certainly limit the need for people to go to Seton Hall's main campus if they were arriving on public transit.
All right, so a stop at the South Orange main train station, is that part of the plan?
It is, actually in both directions, the South Orange, both coming from Maryville and coming from the Maryville campus back to the Seton Hall main campus, and vice versa when you return. So it stops in both directions.
All right. And the hours of operation, you mentioned, what are they again?
Approximately 6:30 to 9, Monday through Thursday, and ending at 6 o'clock on Friday.
All right. And where would the shuttle drop the students off at Marylawn? Did you get into that logistical issue, where at the campus?
Because it's not fully developed yet, generally speaking, it would turn in from, from Scotland Road. It would turn left into the Marylawn campus and drop off somewhere inside the parking lot. That's going to be completely reconfigured, and then proceed out through the rear of the parking lot.
All right, and what would be the size of these vehicles? Did you discuss that?
We estimate the size to be on, most likely on either a Ford E450 or 550 chassis, which equates to, those are medium-duty truck buses where you have the cab on the back, which could handle quite a bit of different sizes, but our recommendation would be to be between 26 and 34 seats on those buses, the shuttle buses that you see now, just a bit longer.
Now, based upon your experience at other universities, do you have an opinion as to whether you believe this shuttle would be a successful means to take students to the campus and divert them from parking?
Yes, I do believe that. It's very common on campuses for a variety of reasons to have remote educational or other facilities that need to be laboratory facilities. We saw that at the University of Tennessee, where they had agricultural and laboratory facilities plus donation that was not walkable at all, an area that was donated that wasn't walkable. The Forrestal campus at Princeton University, Emory and Georgia Tech in Atlanta both have campuses that are in Conyers, which is about 30 minutes apart, and where students have a need to use the facilities both on the main campus and the other campuses. Tulane University is another one where I can think of, where it's very common to go between the uptown and the downtown campuses because you need certain services and facilities. It's very typical that those students would find that effective and worth their time to use and to understand the schedule.
And do you think that education of the students and communicating the service is important?
I do. I think communicating on the website, providing technology and information through the GPS that currently exists on the ShoeFly system, expanding that would be extremely helpful. Providing ambassadors that share that information, especially when it's new, providing that information during the admissions process is always very helpful. And then ongoing communications. There are several methods through social media that help. As people understand the benefits of using the system and the detriments of not following the rules, I think that they are much more likely to use it and enjoy the benefits that they get from an effective and efficient system.
All right, and do you anticipate that the university would place people at Marylawn to reiterate the need to use the shuttle?
I do. I anticipate that they will put people where it makes most sense, both at the Seton Hall campus and Marylawn, just to explain that, especially in the beginning. That would be our recommendation.
All right. Anything you wish to add that we haven't covered in terms of your?
Nope. I think that we covered the overview of the study very well.
All right. We've provided his report to the board. I'd like to have that marked, if I might, as A12, and I have no further questions.
Thank you. Okay, do we have questions? Mr.
I just have
Carlopiano.
a couple to start.
If I may, excuse me, Michael. Mr. Coakley, I note that you marked the report from Mr. Skyer, but we only marked one page of the report that came under cover letter from Betsy Dolan. Did you want to mark that entire exhibit?
You mean, we only marked the one page?
Right.
Yes, maybe that's better. We'll
Right.
mark the.
So we'll mark that
entire
whole.
exhibit as A12.
That whole exhibit will be A11.
Okay.
And that will
The
include.
problem was that the table was not part of that letter.
Right.
So.
And so we'll make the table 11A.
Okay.
All right?
Okay.
And Mr. Skyer would be
Housekeeping
A12.
done?
Thank you.
Housekeeping done.
Good. Mr. Skyer, I understand the use case that you described that are successful for shuttles, where students or faculty have to move back and forth between locations during the day. So they start off at one site, maybe they go to a lab course, another site, come back to finish their day, those types of things. And it makes sense to me that in those cases, a student or faculty member might park their car in one place and then not want to take it out, drive back, and use the shuttle. In this case, we have had testimony that these students will not be on the main campus. All of their classes are would be on the new Marylawn campus, and in fact, they'd be spending what it sounds like, an extended period of time in a day on that campus. In that case, what's any change to your point of view, given that's the testimony about this use case, about whether the shuttle will still be an attractive option for those students?
Well, I think that there are several points that support making it attractive. Number one, it has to be effective and efficient, and effective means it has to be convenient. And I think that the recommendations we have and that Seton Hall has accepted are effective. Having transportation every 15 minutes is a reasonable amount of time to wait. You may end up circling and looking for a parking spot in certain cases for longer than that. During peak periods, it goes down to a shuttle bus every 10 minutes. But to go a little deeper into your question, there will be some cases where people have the opportunity to use some of the services on the main campus. I understand that it may not happen all the time, but that is another thing that's available to them. They may take advantage of that and find that as an advantage for the parking situation. And the third piece that I would say is if they have the opportunity to use this service on a regular basis, it's really very much like a remote parking scenario, and that's what I equate it to. Even if they don't have to come back to the main campus, it functions very much like a remote park and ride, and with this 11 to 15-minute ride for them, plus, which would be half of the additional piece to consider would be, it's only half that ride if they're coming from the South Orange Transit Station for some of those potential users.
Well, can you give me an estimate? So your document says 11 to 15 minutes, and let's just take that as a given for the route. If I have to, if the wait time between shuttles in a peak hour is 15 minutes, let's just pick 7 minutes as saying I got there in the middle and I waited 7 minutes. I had to park in a parking deck, one of the new deck probably that we've approved, and walk down. That sounds to me like the total time between when I'm parking and when I'm getting to class is about 30 minutes. Does that seem about reasonable to you?
It does, especially if you want to not be late for class.
And that's so the other issue for me in whether the shuttle will be appealing is 30 minutes. If I had an option to park on a street in the neighborhood that was 5, 6 blocks away, 8 blocks away, 30 minutes covers a lot of walking. And I, what I wonder about is that balance, right? Whether if I know it's about 30 minutes to use the shuttle, why wouldn't I look for other options that might put me 10, 15, even 20-minute walk? 20-minute walk is a mile away from campus, but let me control my own fate.
Well, a lot of what you ask, I don't know what an individual person would use as their determining factor. What I do know is some considerations that we look at in those scenarios would be the safety of your automobile. Your automobile, and I'm certainly not, disparaging anything as far as the police department goes, but your automobile's parked on the street. Anything can happen to it. Mm-hmm. Less likely that you may feel that way, that it's parked in the parking deck. There are other factors too. If they, again with enforcement, if they're not allowed to park there and they end up getting a ticket or booted or towed, that's certainly a reason not to do that. And then there's the convenience factor of being able to utilize the services on campus, whether it's studying, the library, even if they don't have classes. There are other features, additional food service features that they have. Anything more would be me guessing at what somebody would.
Your testimony is that you're planning on there being 2 trips by a shuttle bus that are convenient to the start time for a class at peak times. If the buses that you're recommending have about 30 seats, that means there'd be 60 seats to get students to campus for that time. The testimony we've had here is that there are, and you've heard this earlier today, about 101 students can park at the Marylawn site. The classrooms hold a total of 360, leaving about 250 students who have to get to campus. We've had testimony from the dean that on certain days, an entire program would be there from 8 in the morning until 6 at night, and they'd run through their courses. That means you're going to have to move 250 students, it sounds to me, conveniently within that half-hour window of the classes beginning on that Tuesday or Thursday, as the dean testified. That's a much bigger operation than 2 shuttles in half an hour of 30 students each.
Well, during the peak periods, we anticipate 3 shuttles. That's what they.
Yeah, but given the testimony, wouldn't you have to be planning on carrying several hundred students in the morning on those days? I mean, the dean, I don't know if you've seen the testimony, but you should look at, what the dean testified, that on certain days, the entire, physical therapy program is on campus. All the students are there, and they run through their classes through the day, and they stay on campus for the whole day. Certainly, the way I read that testimony, and, and in my questions with him, the classrooms were full from the morning through, because those students were on site. And that makes me think there's a need to move a couple hundred students if you're really going to take the shuttle early in the morning. And certainly this plan doesn't seem to address that need.
Well, I have not seen that testimony. What we used were the peak periods of class, and we made some assumptions. We certainly didn't assume that everyone would come at the exact same time. That would create a bottleneck. You're absolutely right. If we assume 30 passengers on 2 trips an hour, so that's 60 per bus. So that gives us, if there are 3 buses running peak period, 180. So you have 30 plus 30, so that's twice in the hour.
Right, that's in an hour. That means some students are arriving an hour before class begins.
Absolutely, but it certainly would be staggered, and a lot of times in a situation like this, we would recommend that you would stage the buses so that they would be there one after the other if you expect a rush at the same time. So we don't anticipate that in normal operations that it would require that type of significant movement. If it does, if that is in fact what happens, then they would need more buses. You're absolutely right. But there's an education process that's required too. Students will have to space their times based on their personal preferences as well to make sure that they can move there quickly. I mean, there is a limit.
We've had testimony from Mr. Garbini, for example, compelling testimony over a series of cases about the need for the university to provide convenient services for the students. And so that, I keep coming back to this question, at what point does this shuttle system become inconvenient enough that it drives students to look for other options, such as what a number of members of the public have been asking about tonight? And it doesn't feel to me like the plan that you presented speaks to that peak demand and gets to a level of convenience. I mean, if you're now talking about needing to get to class an hour early in order to make sure I have a seat on the bus, that feels to me like I'm looking for other options at that point. And so I just, when I look at this plan, it doesn't feel to me it addresses the situation as the dean presented the way the campus would be used. Now, the other question I have...
Was that a question?
That was a question. That's a question.
Okay, well, do you have a response?
No, I mean, I haven't heard that testimony, so I don't. I mean, I think the assumptions that we made and put in the report focus on a mixed use. People will arrive earlier to either break in their day. That is our assumption. If there is, in fact, a need for 250 people to move in a 30-minute period, the facts are there. You would definitely want to do that, but that didn't appear to be what we would expect to happen in one period of time that people would need to move in.
Did you examine the schedule of the school and the students?
We did. We examined the schedule of the school. We looked at different peaks. It's also part of our study part of our recommendation, not the study, but the recommendation requires that transit be simple to understand. And if we change the peak periods of times all day long, people are just not going to understand it. They'll even be less inclined to use it. We did recommend, to your point, that there be a 4th bus available on call, depending on what actually happened, because a lot of these things are assumptions based on what may or may not happen. I don't know if every class will be full. So we did recommend that be on call to anticipate the additional need. And these buses can be a little bit longer, so they could accommodate we could find buses that are a little bit larger, going up to as many as 40 seats as possible.
You actually say 50 in your You actually say 50 in your
The
plan.
50 is coach buses, but based on going to the transit station, that would be very difficult. If we didn't go to the transit station, it's more possible, but tight.
My last question is about the timing of the route. By my count, the route you've laid out would require going through 10 traffic lights between leaving campus and then doing the turnaround at Seton Hall, at Mary Lawn. And it just, you know, I haven't timed it, right? But it just feels to me like knowing what it's like driving in rush hour traffic down South Orange Avenue past, you know, coming into town as you go down the hill, those traffic lights back up, and there's 10 of them. So getting through those 3 or 4 traffic lights in the middle of town, and then looping through the lot, coming through the 3rd Street traffic light, and then back across Scotland Road, feels to me like it's going to be a lot longer than 10 to 15 minutes. And I wonder, you know, to what extent, how did you come up with that timing? Have you sat in the traffic coming down South Orange Avenue into town? It can
No,
be
I
endless.
haven't. Today was the first day I was here in South Orange.
Yeah, I do think the at rush hour, which is, you know, particularly in the afternoon, but in the morning as well, that those traffic lights really back up coming down South Orange Avenue. And, you know, so the time for transit needs to be looked at again in light of actual traffic conditions. Thanks.
All very good points. On Mr. Parlapiano's part, I think that maybe a closer assessment of the actual conditions on the roadways is important. How many stops are you planning? Are these push pins on your plan representing stops?
Yeah, three stops.
Two within the site, and then 2, so 4 total, right?
I'm sorry, 4,
Right,
yes.
2 within Seton Hall property, 1 at the train station, South Orange, and 1 at the Mary Lawn site.
That's correct.
And you're talking about a total of 4 buses in possession of Seton Hall?
Our recommendation was to have the 3 buses for peak periods and the 4th as in reserve.
But they have to own 4 buses.
Right now, they contract out. They could continue to contract out, or they could purchase.
I see, so the buses aren't stored on Seton Hall property.
I don't know where they're stored.
And in reality, because of the way that the programming for the Mary Lawn site is set up, it's really similar to event kind of service. You know, liken it to a ball game or something, where everybody's arriving and everybody's departing around the same time. So you basically have to stage buses in a piggyback fashion, waiting for school to let out, or waiting for kids to arrive, or adults to arrive to go to their classes. Which, in that regard, your timetable of 15 minutes is not incredibly realistic, as Mr. Parlapiano already suggested. You said that you'd have a bus in reserve and that you could stack buses. Is that correct?
Yes, especially like in the beginning, to address the situation you were talking about.
Right.
In the beginning of class, if you have a large lecture that requires a significant...
the classes all start at the same time. Everybody arrives at the same time on the site. That's the testimony that we heard.
It's not his testimony.
Yeah, that
Right.
isn't what I saw from the analysis
Right,
we had.
I understand. Right, so...
And we also don't anticipate that all of those students would leave at the same time. Some may stay, some may work. We don't know what they'll do.
I mean, Ms. Dolan testified everybody arrived at the same time, at least 85% of the students parking and all of the faculty
Right.
and staff, as an assumption with respect to her traffic analysis. That's not the same testimony as Dean Schulman nor this witness.
I understand.
Okay.
Actually, Dean Schulman said the same thing about, and so did the vice president, about students. You know, classes basically they last all day. Students arrive in the morning, they leave in the afternoon. But in any case, I assume that you're willing to change these plans to accommodate that kind of traffic, right? In terms of students arriving and departing.
Absolutely, we'll consult with Seton Hall, and you know, if they have an address a change that they want us to address, we would certainly do that.
Do you think it's possible to address that kind of timing of arrivals with 4 buses?
And the information that we have is presented in the reports, and I want to try to answer your question, but based on the information we have and the assumptions that we made, that one particular student, they wouldn't all arrive and they wouldn't all leave at the same time. They're going to do different things. Some will have multiple classes, some won't, some will have lab. That was an assumption we had to make as we were anticipating that it wouldn't be 100% of everyone who came would leave at the same time, based on the classes. We don't know what an individual person would do. So if there was a need to adjust that because there was a cohort of people that did arrive and leave at the same time, we would certainly look at that and make a different recommendation.
So you don't know whether it's possible to meet that need if they all arrived at the same time with 4 buses? I know you didn't do that analysis, but do you think that it's something that 4 buses would be able to accommodate based on your professional experience?
Well, you can only put as many passengers on a bus as will fit, and if there are 40 seats on a bus and it takes 15 minutes to go, it'd be 40 times 4, it'd be 160, and that would be the maximum you could move for that trip. You could stage the trips, you could have them. So yes, I mean that part is the math doesn't change no matter what. If you need 5 buses or 2 buses, it's based on the number of passengers. It's just how frequently we move them and how we stage them are the only things that can affect a mass amount of people at the same time if they arrived at the same time.
Right, so it sounds, I don't want to read into what you're saying, but it sounds like it's conceivable that 4 buses, if bunched, could supply service for over 100 people per trip. And since they're bunched and you got a 22-minute, according to your report, 22-minute cycle, then you could take care of in 45 minutes, you could take care of over 200 people.
You could do that if you bunched them, and they did have the 11 minutes, yes.
Right. And if you did have to do that, where would you stage the buses for the return trip in the evening? Where would you hold them?
That isn't a question I can answer right now. I don't know the answer to that. I'd have to look into that more carefully and talk to the folks at Seton Hall. I don't know exactly what the plans are at the Maryland campus.
Okay. That's all I have for now.
Thanks.
Yeah, I have this. I have to be careful. I'm admonishing everybody else not to repeat questions, and I don't want to do the same myself. But I see here your initial proposed schedule, Mr. Skyer, is not a stage schedule. It's like a bus route in a city block. Every 10 minutes or so, a bus goes. And that doesn't give me confidence about that that's realistic. These are students who are going to arrive, school's going to start around the same time. And why didn't you, for example, put the example here of a staged schedule? Why this, 6:35 a.m. the first bus leaves Seton Hall. That's an hour and a half before 8:05 when maybe the first class would start. Why did you do that schedule as opposed to staging? Is this...
Well, we do reference it for the initial presentation of this. This was our first time looking at that. A couple of things. One is there are classes that start as early as 7 on the Maryland campus based on the information that we have. And we also did mention in our analysis that a staged approach in the beginning would make sense. Certainly for the first class, if it's a large lecture or you had a large demand for student passengers, for passengers. The reason we presented this way was really for clarity, and then we talked about that in the discussion, that it could be adjusted.
Again, as Mr. Parlapiano suggested, your proposal assumes that people will actually use the bus and not elect to just park on close by residential streets. At Princeton, when you have the bus going to the Forrestal campus, where's that going, from the grad school, undergrad? Who's it taking there?
It's taking students from the main campus. I don't recall.
Princeton's not a commuter school. Were you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay, so that I'm not sure that example really fits with what's going on here. You have students who live on campus who have no other choice but to take the bus to the Forrestal campus, which is several miles away. Here, these are going to be grad students who are not part of the undergraduate mix, who will be arriving typically by car. And yet you have confidence that in this sort of scenario that they're going to park on the parking lot and not use the local streets. Have you ever provided consultation to a university where this happens, where it's a grad students arriving via car and that they're proposing to herd them all into buses?
Well, we've certainly provided consulting services to universities that have graduate students, yes, and many of them do use the bus service. We wouldn't assume how many do or don't have cars, how many would or wouldn't use public transit from the South Orange station. Those are all options that will reduce the number of cars that may potentially park on the campus, and also people may choose to park on the campus because that's the best option for them. They find the service that it meets their needs.
Any other questions?
I have a couple. So if, let me go back. You said that you're not familiar with the dean's testimony. What information did you use and who'd you get it from?
We got the information from the facilities department about the number of students that would be at the maximum use for each class period. That was Michael Marconi actually forwarded it to us.
Or probably the same table that we have in his testimony. I'm not sure.
But that's where we got. So it was and it's in our report, the analysis that we used.
Right, it's this table.
Okay.
It's the table on page 7.
That's correct, the table on page 7.
So I understand if buses are running every 10 minutes, then if I want to make a bus and I miss the bus, I'll get another one in 10 minutes. So maybe I'll be 10 minutes late, or I'll try to get there 10 minutes early just in case I do miss one bus. But if they're all staged, if they're all going at the same time, what does a student have to do in order to be sure that they make the bus?
Well, we would not recommend that they be staged all day long. That wouldn't fit with a normal transit operation. If the first class in the morning or at the end of the day, the examples that were provided, that would make sense to stage. There's no sense in waiting if you can stage the buses, load and go, and send them to the campus and have them to the Marylawn campus and have them return quickly. That would make more sense in the beginning, and then move to the schedule, to the 10-minute schedule. So it would be more for just for that initial push if that's what happened, if people arrived all at the same time and you had people queuing up to go, that's when we would recommend doing that.
Right, well, based on the schedule, isn't that what's going to happen? That a lot of people will be going at one time?
I mean, there are definitely peak periods, which is why we recommended having that tripper bus, the 3 or 4 hours, but we didn't see where it was 250 people at one time. That wasn't occurring at one particular time.
Okay. And in order to make the bus, I mean, how much time do you recommend somebody, lead time, how much should they give themselves in order to make a bus that's going from campus to campus?
I'm not sure when you say lead time, you mean from your car? I don't...
Well, if I had to make a bus at 9 o'clock to go from campus to campus, and I said, sir, how much time should I figure, how much lead time should I give myself in order to make sure I make that bus?
Well, I mean...
Should I try to get there at exact time that the bus leaves, or 1 minute before, or?
Well, you certainly need to park your car and walk to the location where the bus loads. So in the parking deck, it's relatively close. I would say 5 to 7 minutes, depending on how fast you walked and, you know, where you found a parking spot. If you're on a lower floor, it would really depend. And the parking and where the bus loaded is very close to right across the street where the proposed stop is.
Well, besides that, I mean, if you're going to the airport and your plane is leaving at 9 o'clock at night, besides TSA, you want to give yourself a big leeway, and make sure nothing happens, you don't get stuck in traffic, you don't get a flat, whatever it is. You give yourself a bunch of lead time in order to make your plane, don't you?
Sure.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So, and then same thing with buses. I mean, if I want to make a bus that's going to leave at 9 o'clock to get me to my class at 9:30, how much lead time would you recommend to a student that student give himself or herself in order to be sure to make the bus?
I mean, I think from the time you get on campus and you park, depending on how far you park, when you say
From the time I leave home, if it normally takes 20 minutes to drive to campus, and I want to make a 9 o'clock bus and make sure I make it, because if I don't, I'm going to miss my class. How much time when should I leave my house?
I don't know where you live.
It's
I mean, I'm not trying to, I don't.
It's normally a 20-minute trip from my house to campus, normally. And the bus is going to leave at 9, and I have to be on that bus. When should I leave my house? What would you recommend as a transportation expert to a student?
So rather than, I'm sorry to interrupt, but rather than answer a question about a specific person's trip, why don't you answer with what the general guidelines are in your profession for headway to, whether or not people, give more time. I think that Mr. Parlapiano kind of touched on it a little bit, saying, 7.5 minutes is half of 15. Certainly the longer the headway, the more lead time people give, because the risk of being late is greater. So maybe you can talk to that.
Thank you for the clarification. Typically, we recommend about 5 minutes before the scheduled time for the bus to arrive, and of course, you'd use the GPS. So whatever worked out for you in your particular situation, or any student, I would estimate that you'd want to arrive at the bus stop about 5 minutes before the bus was scheduled to be there, using the GPS as the additional technology to check it. So if you parked 5 minutes away, you'd want to be on campus. Took you 5 minutes to get to your car, to get to your parking spot. That doesn't matter whether you're parking or you're riding a bus. That time is the same. But here you know where you're going, so you're not trolling for a spot. 10 minutes before you go to the parking deck, you park and you walk down. You're there 5 minutes before the bus. You'll make your bus. That's a typical standard approach that we take in the transit industry.
Is that approach written in a manual?
I don't know.
This may be a bit abstruse, but is there any study that you can point to that in this sort of situation where students have the capacity to park on residential streets, yet choose the bus that you offer? Is there any sort of industry standard on that as to what percentage of students do that? I mean, we're just to see. What I'm questioning, obviously, there's no secret here. What we're all concerned about, and what the townspeople are concerned about, is this assumption, unexamined, that the students that don't have parking permits are going to use the shuttle. And we're, frankly, a little skeptical of it. And you're just saying, well, they will use the shuttle. Okay, well, that's your assertion. Do you have anything more than that assertion?
Well, again, the enforcement, if they don't have viable options to park on the streets, that's one thing that would certainly limit them. Addition to that, the campus, the Seton Hall administration is considering having much lower costs for parking for the students who go to Maryland who park on the Seton Hall main campus. The parking rates would be higher on the campus for those who even were able to get one of the 100 spots. They're encouraging the carpooling. They're giving primary consideration to those who will carpool, and so you have more people on those rides. So that will limit the amount of capacity needed on the buses as well. So there's some incentives for them that they're putting in there, and also making sure that the bus service is reliable. If you do make that commitment to be there 25 minutes or 35 minutes beforehand, you should be assured that that bus will arrive on time and bring you to the Maryville campus on time, and that's a primary way that you can ensure that people will use it as well.
So I didn't add it up, sir. So how many bus trips are there a day, in and out?
I don't know, I'd have to count it, but if during the peak periods, at 10-minute intervals, you've got 6 per hour, and then at the 15-minute intervals, you've got 4 with 2 buses.
And, have you looked at the site plan for this project?
On the Marylong campus?
Yes.
No, I haven't. I've been out to the campus, but I haven't looked at the site plan.
I mean, how much room does a bus take to, one of these, I guess, 50-seaters, to pull onto campus and discharge, and then, I don't know, how much room do you need for that?
Well, I'm not sure if the room is the best indicator, and I think, and please, if I'm not answering your question, let me know, but the turning radius is typically what we're most concerned with when we're trying to navigate an area. And the turning radius is typically, and I'm not an engineer, but typically the length of the bus. Now, a 50-passenger bus, a coach bus, doesn't have the same turning radius. We're not recommending those. But these buses that are body on chassis, which we are recommending, the shuttle bus that you see now, those buses have, if it's a 32 or 34, 36-footer, that's the turning radius they need. My assumption would be that that would be something that could be easily handled in the parking lot with the site, but I haven't seen the site plan, but I'm sure that consideration would be there.
Ms. Gruhl?
Mr. Schuyler, if, as you're determining the success and the success of students riding the shuttle, is one of the variables the surrounding neighborhood or the surrounding area to where they're riding the shuttle to? In other words, as we're talking about this, the area around Marylawn is a residential neighborhood with on-street parking in some form, okay? It appears that maybe some of the other examples that you give are not comparable to that kind of scenario, where again, the success of the program is almost partially geared to, or the shuttle, may partially be geared to what is the probability or the probability that there's an alternative that is almost as convenient as riding the shuttle. I'm not sure I've made it clear. For example, you gave Forrestal as an example with Princeton. That's a different scenario in terms of where they're going to, Forrestal, versus the area around Marylawn. And I gather you have not been out to the site up until today. So I'm not sure how that factors into your evaluation as to the success of a shuttle program.
Well, the Forrestal, you are absolutely correct. The Forrestal location was more of a representation of a remote campus, and I was trying to give a mix. No two campuses are identical. That's absolutely the case. But we try to pull the similarities where we can. I think Tulane University would be a more appropriate example, because they do have a lot of on-street parking that can be used, and people will push into those areas when they don't have other good options, and that's one of the reasons why they ended up expanding their shuttle system and increasing the frequencies to make it more effective. I think if people are allowed to park and it's only a block away and they're not limited, they may do that. I mean, it would make sense in some cases, but if they're limited or they're not, or that's enforced, then they wouldn't. This is to provide a good alternative for them to getting a ticket or getting booted or towed. I think that's what we're, if they have a parking permit, I think some of them will use that on campus. That makes perfect sense. Some may choose to use the transit, and we're providing bus service from the transit, making more attractive for a short ride just from the South Orange station. So those are the things that we're looking for, to make it efficient and convenient for them to get on. They do have to plan for it, but then they're able to use that service effectively.
So it's a combination of the carrot, which is efficient and convenient service, and the stick, which is taking away the other options that may be available.
Absolutely, that's very well put.
So
yes.
is
You
that
need both.
kind of how you're looking at that?
You certainly do. Without an effective parking plan, which includes enforcement, sure, people will do whatever they can get away with. There's no question about it, and that is in any scenario on any campus. But we also see where there's an effective and well-communicated plan, and information is given to the students, and they understand what's required of them and what they're able to do, and also what's offered to them. The lower costs of the parking on Seton Hall's campus, the effective transportation, the ability to use the downtown effectively and take advantage of some of the things down there, also to use the public transit. That's the carrot that you referenced. So yes, you do need both.
Where would you say you have successfully used the stick in a comparable situation, and how successful has that been?
I don't have one that comes to mind like a specific example. I know in every single campus that we work in, where parking is not regulated, then the transit is not as successful. That is a blanket statement. When parking is regulated and enforced fairly, and everyone understands where they stand and they have good options, that's really what it boils down to in almost every scenario, is that there are options that are clearly communicated and they can be effectively used by all the students. Some students, some faculty members want to pay very little for parking. They're willing to ride. Some want to pay an exorbitant amount for a reserved spot with their name on it, and they're able to do that. And that all works together with the transit system to make it effective.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a question that I don't think you'll know the answer to, but it's pertinent. Do you know what's the pattern here at Seton Hall near campus with spaces that are supposedly off limits to students and whether they park there nonetheless?
On camp, I don't have any specific knowledge. No, I don't.
Mr. Adler.
Sir, do you envision bus stops, covered bus stops at all? Or, I mean, well, that's the question. Do you?
We didn't recommend those, given the information we had. I think that on campus, and I'd have to refer exactly to it, there's probably some folks here who could better answer that. I think that there are covered areas where they can wait and see the buses on campus. At the Mary Lawn, I don't have any specific knowledge of whether or not that would make sense right now.
Well, don't you need something like that for in case it's raining or snowing or hailing? Don't you need bus stops?
If depending on where right now the bus stop is right in front of a building, so you could just wait right underneath the awning there. Seton Hall, that would be a decision that they would make if they were going to install a bus stop shelter.
What building, what awning?
It's across the street, forgive me, I don't remember it's right across the street from the rec center.
It's Seton Hall.
At Seton Hall. No, at Mary Lawn, I do not know. I don't have that knowledge. That would be Seton Hall's decision.
So on page 9 of your report, you talk about staging, and you said that with a high volume of students expected to arrive in short periods of time, the assumption is that lines will exist. What do you do about lines of people, students waiting to get on a bus?
I'm sorry, could you repeat your question?
Yeah, what do you do about lines of students waiting to get on a bus?
What do we do about, I mean, I'm not sure.
Is that a problem?
Well, it depends certainly on how long the lines are and how often they happen. I mean, with any transit system or in any operations, there are going to be times when your peak need on occasion exceeds your capacity. In this particular case, if this happened one time or very rarely or infrequently, well, I don't know that we would recommend bringing on another bus. We would do things to educate the passengers to make them come differently. If it's happening on a regular basis, absolutely, you have to address it, or else people will not effectively use the system anymore. They'll be very. It won't be a good option for them anymore, and then they'll look for other options that may not be what everyone wants. So that makes sense.
Well, how do you educate them about not waiting online if they have to get to school and there are a bunch of people trying to get to school at the same time on your bus?
I don't think you would educate somebody about not waiting online. I think what you would educate people on, and what we recommend on a regular basis, is sharing with them the schedules, the expected times. If you want to make sure that you'll make your classes, if you have these classes, look online. We also recommend providing communications through your GPS system, through Twitter, through text messaging, so that you can let people know if there are delays that are unexpected that may create those lines. It's a movable system, a transit system, and there are going to be a need for communication. If the lines and the queues are regular, then it's certainly an operational issue that needs to be addressed by bigger capacity. But if people are constantly queuing up at the same time and everybody wants the bus that will get them there 5 minutes before class, that will never work. That will always be a problem. So we want to educate and incent people using the carrot that would help them understand that it's better to get there a little earlier and be relaxed for your class.
Well, but I'm looking at page 9 of your report.
Yes, sir.
And it's just talking about the high volume of students expected to arrive in short periods of time. The assumption is that lines will exist. I mean, what is there to educate?
Well, if you look at the next sentence,
Yeah.
you'll notice that that's where we recommend the staging. So at that particular time,
Which
if
means
the-
exactly what? So tell me exactly how staging would work.
Sure. Staging would be having buses parked in a row, 3 or 4 buses on the Seton Hall campus, waiting for people as they load up. So when you're going to have more than 40 people arrive within a short given period of time, what you want to do is load and go with those buses. Load up the 40 people, send them to the Mary Long campus, start loading the next bus. So you're moving through those 35 to 40 people as quickly as possible. We get the next 35 to 40, send them down, and then bring the next ones up. When the queues subside and the lines are not as long or they're more on a typical, then we go back to the 10 or 15-minute schedule.
Okay.
That's normal in this type of operation. You'd expect to have to do that on occasion.
And would that work the same way in reverse, going from Mary Lawn back to the parking deck?
It would.
So if, I know you haven't looked at the site, but I mean, if you were staging 3 or 4 or 5, however many buses, I mean, would that cut into the parking area? I mean, where would they be?
I really wouldn't be able to comment on that. I don't know what the driveway will look like. I don't know the distance. That would have to be something that I'd have to look at more detail.
Okay, and also, just because I'm a little confused, on page 9, you talk about a 50-plus passenger coach buses, but I think you just testified that you wouldn't be using those. Is that correct?
Right. We looked at both options from a capacity standpoint. That was their initial look, because when we first were contacted by Seton Hall, and based on our conversations, we wanted to show in the study to Seton Hall that we consider both, but based on our conversations and then now on seeing the site, it's not practical to put a coach size. The coach bus is the one that go over the road. It's not practical to move that on these routes.
Well, I guess I don't understand. You said when you first spoke to them, this is dated August 22nd. I mean, this is recent. That you're talking about a 50-plus passenger coach bus.
Right, I mean, we looked, that's what I'm saying, we looked at both, we looked at different options, but our final recommendation was based on the 32, approximately 32 to 35.
Okay, I mean, this says, or 50-plus passenger coach buses are
I apologize
recommended.
if the way it's written is confusing, but that was just the comparison should be there, but we should clarify that.
Okay.
Other questions? I think our engineer has a goal.
I have some questions, Mr. Skyer. You talked a lot about technology and how, the carrot and the stick. When a student takes the bus, is there some sort of card or something that they have to use to get on the bus on either end?
That technology does exist, but it wasn't something that was requested or required by Seton Hall.
Okay. Do you know what they use on their existing shuttle buses?
I'm not aware that they use that type of technology on their existing buses, but they might. I haven't been on them.
Okay. Assuming that they did use that type of technology, is there a way to track students' usage of the shuttle to see whether they're using it as opposed to, if they don't have a parking pass, whether they're using the shuttle or they're obviously using some other means of getting to campus? Is that a reasonable tracking program?
Yes, that does exist and can be done with the student IDs.
So there is a way to see if they're actually using the shuttle, not when they're doing it, but on a daily basis when they should be there, that they are using the shuttle.
You absolutely could use that. You could use their student IDs and track even to the time and where they got on the bus, yes.
Okay. So there would be a process that they could implement a policy if they wanted to as to the stick component of the approach.
They could, yes. That is very possible to do.
Okay.
Well, wouldn't I, as a student, say, if I got a big brother looking over me and said, John, you're not taking the bus, you have no permit, and you're not taking the bus 5 days of the week you're supposed to be here, so we don't want you irritating the local residents by parking on their streets, and that's what we think you're doing. Don't I just say, yeah, well, I'm riding my bike? How? This is the
Just
first I've heard
exploring
of it.
options. I mean, there's obviously a concern about students potentially parking in the neighborhoods.
Yeah. It just immediately came to mind that, not that I would lie, but one might.
Oh, I like that.
It's a violation of one of the commandments, I believe. All right.
With whether it's staging the buses or a regular route, is it possible to have alternate routes? If that bus is full, is there any reason for that bus to go to the train station to try and pick somebody else up where it's already full? Could they just then continue on to Mary Lawn, and they would have to make some other arrangements for somebody to get picked up at the train station?
Yeah, that is very likely. I think there would be a little bit of planning involved in that, making it more of an express bus, and that would probably come into play if we had, in this scenario, the fourth bus included in there. I think making an express bus, if that's what happened, and again, some of this has to be experiential. We just don't know exactly what the usage pattern, but it's an excellent point, and it would work very effectively in that scenario. Why waste your time? You get there quicker, and you can move much more quickly back and forth. So
Right.
yes, an express bus would certainly work in that scenario.
In looking at the schedule to the train station, did you look at New Jersey Transit's schedule as to when the trains arrive at the station and would depart, what the timing would be, and how that might line up with?
We didn't go to that level of
You
detail.
didn't go, okay. Looking at on page 6, there's there's 6 different examples of the Seton Hall shuttle making round-trip distances, or a round trip of 5.5 miles in various times. Where did that information come from?
That is just an analysis that we do. That's just standard math analysis. We look at those to present to the customer. We weren't here on campus. We didn't have the experience. We didn't know what the traffic patterns were. A lot of times when we do, we'll look at experiencing it at different times. It's always an estimate, but based on the speed of the roads and the size of the roads, we felt comfortable with an 11-mile-an-hour estimate. That's including starts and stops, and that's...
Okay. So this is theoretical. This is not based on any travel time studies from point A to point B?
No, that was beyond the scope of the study.
Okay. And this includes boarding time to load the buses, to have the students get on the buses?
It does, yes.
It does. Okay.
It does. It looks like it provides some kind of a sensitivity analysis, though, if your travel times aren't as good as you anticipate.
It does, and it also provides a comparison, so that's one of the reasons we provide that, for an easy look to see if there's reason for adjustments. That gives a good evaluation right in front of you.
And you may not be able to answer this question, but from your experience at other universities with a shuttle type program, is it appropriate, reasonable to set aside an area within the parking garage that would provide more convenient parking and therefore access to the shuttle for those students going to Maryland?
That would really have to be a Seton Hall decision. That really wouldn't be something, we could comment on. If there was a long walk time and they couldn't find any parking, that would be a recommendation we might make, but that would certainly be the university's decision.
Okay. All right. Just again, this is to the carrot side as opposed to the
Right.
stick.
They
You
did-
want
they-
somebody.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you want somebody to use something, if you give them every opportunity to make it more convenient, they're more likely to do it.
Understood.
On page 5, in the first paragraph, it says, schedule does not anticipate the need for a fourth bus because it is unlikely that the demand will be for full capacity based on classroom utilization. I didn't quite understand what that sentence meant. Could you?
Sure. I'll be glad to clarify. Our assumption, again, we wanted to state that assumption, was that we didn't anticipate that every classroom would be filled every day to full capacity in reality, because there were too many ups and downs in the patterns to make a bus schedule that met the exact demands based on particular times. So we did flatten it out a bit. And part of the reason to flatten that out was we didn't assume that every single student would attend every class every time. But that still would get the majority of them there. But the fourth bus is sort of kept in reserve, again, because it could be that attendance is close to 100%. We certainly wouldn't know that now. And
Right.
that's why we'd recommend having that in reserve.
Okay. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
I have a couple questions. Mr. Don? Mr. Schuyler, is it safe to say that this analysis that we're looking at here is almost sort of like a first pass at what could happen, and that the final, let's call it schedule or system of this shuttle would really be a function of how Seton Hall set up the classes? In other words, you made your assumptions on load based on a certain class criteria that's on, I think it's on your page, it's the table, that's on page 7.
Correct.
If those numbers or that schedule changes, obviously your deployment of the buses may be, and it may change from semester to semester depending on how what the class schedule is.
If it did change significantly from semester to semester, yes, there would be an adjustment, and you're right. If there was a significant difference in what actually was deployed, then the recommendations would change. And Seton Hall has definitely indicated that this is there's definitely movability here.
This is a
depending on
work in
needs.
progress.
It certainly will be, and especially it'll have to be based on the activity that actually occurs. People's transit patterns will develop, and they'll learn too. The transit usage will increase over time. We've always seen that as they understand the value and the benefits for them, so long as they can count on it, it's efficient and it's and reliable.
Okay. I don't know that anybody's asked this yet, but I'm going to ask it. Is there an out-of-pocket cost to the students to use this shuttle?
There is not.
Okay. Your numbers here are based on 82.1% of the students needing access to transportation because there's only 100 or so spaces on site for parking. Could a system work if 100% of the students were taking the shuttle? In other words, if you added the other 17.9%? I mean, it would change the number.
Sure, it would change the number of buses you need, but certainly with enough time and money, you can put together any kind of transit system. But absolutely, I think that the movement of students could be handled by, if you needed to, sure.
And I think it's been touched on by a couple other of the members here, but I think if there's going to be a shuttle system, I think we should see a site plan that accommodates those places where those buses are going to stack. Because, as Mr. Adler said, that could have some effect on parking spaces.
That's one of the many problems associated with buses
Right.
holding on site.
Right.
I live about halfway between these two campuses, and I think this whole idea of the carrot and the stick is really the key to the whole system. If I was going to that campus, I'd park in front of my house and walk. It's not that far. And I'd be out of range probably of any parking restrictions. So I think that's, and I hear what the residents are saying. I think that, and I don't know how you deal with it or how Seton Hall deals with it, but I think it's something that that parking restriction or how they deal with parking in the neighborhoods is going to be a key component to whether this system works. Because if there's a spot 4 blocks away in Montrose, no student in his right mind is going to take the shuttle. And that's not a reflection on your system, it's just a fact. A 5-minute walk is a lot easier than a 30-minute bus ride. I just think that that's something that we have to come to grips with. That's all I have.
Okay, so that's not a question.
No, that was a run-on sentence.
Okay. Other questions for the expert? Mr. Renda?
Yeah. Referring to page 3 of your report, which shows the route, it looks like there's 2 locations.
Sal, they're not picking you up. I'm getting they gave you one of the non-functional ones. I can hear you.
The plan shows what appears to be 2 locations on campus for pickups. Is that?
That's correct.
That's
yes.
correct. Okay. And then the route is basically around the campus to South Orange Avenue down to the train station area. Pickup in that location, then looping around Church Street, 3rd Street, up Scotland Road to the Mary Lawn campus.
That's correct.
Okay. Your calculation shows it's about 4.5 miles. You estimated about 11 miles an hour. That's basically a 15-minute route.
Correct.
Okay. Then taking that 15 minutes, adding the second stop on campus and the second stop at the train station would add a few more minutes, I would assume, to the route.
It does not. The 11-mile-an-hour estimate includes the deceleration, the pickup, and the acceleration at 11 miles an hour. If you were just driving in your car, your average speed might be 14 or 15 miles an hour, 16, depending on the time of day. It could even be a little higher.
Okay.
But depends, of course, on traffic lights and all.
All right, so that the 11 miles an hour takes into consideration, out of the 10 traffic signals you go through, perhaps hitting half of them.
It is an
90-second
estimate.
cycles, doing things like that, so that's an estimate.
It's an estimate, but yes.
And then you testified before that if the bus was full leaving campus, it would most likely not go down to the train station because it's already full. It would go directly to the campus, to the Mary Lawn site.
Well, that would definitely have to be addressed. If that was occurring on a regular basis, we would recommend that the university would switch to an express route or split the routes so that the 2 buses, one would go to the campus for a period of time, one would go to the train station and one wouldn't. That would have to be experiential. We don't know that that's going to happen on a regular basis, but if it does, then that recommendation would come.
Okay, now the reason I bring that up is because if the bus is filling up on campus, then a much shorter route would not be going down South Orange Avenue to Scotland Road. It would be going in a different direction, Center Street to most likely Montrose Avenue, and going directly to the Mary Lawn campus. It's much shorter. There's 2 traffic lights to deal with as opposed to 10 traffic lights to deal with. Is there a possibility that the bus or the shuttle would take that route instead to make a shorter run?
That is something the university could consider, and if that made sense to do, I mean, that is possible. It certainly is another access point. But it depends on whether or not that made sense to do on a regular basis or just for the express routes. That would be a university decision, but they could, sure.
Well, the reason I bring that up is because, as you mentioned before, the current route is basically through non-residential areas.
Right.
That other route, the shorter distance, the quicker time, is purely residential through there.
Right.
And I think there would be a concern if the bus is full to take that direct route going down Montrose to get right to the school as opposed to taking basically what are county roads.
And if I can add, we did look at that route as a possibility and chose not to include that after discussions with CNOL because it was purely residential. While it is a possible route, because it would work physically, if you cut out the train station loop, it would still be a significantly, given the times, 3-4 minutes, 5 minutes faster, depending on traffic. It would still make a difference on your loop times. If you reduce 3 or 4 minutes both directions, that would make an impact, even if you stayed on the South Orange and the Scotland Road route without going to the train station for that express route. So I don't think you have to do that in order to deal with that scenario. You don't have to go through the residential areas.
Any other questions?
I think I have one more. On your charts on page 4, just so I understand it, there's no bus service between 8:05 and 11:05. Is that correct? Just so I understand the chart.
Oh, no. That means rather than write down every time point, we just said that buses would be serviced every 10 minutes.
Okay, every 10 minutes starting at what time?
At 8:05. It moves to a 10-minute schedule, which means that the third bus is on, and then it reverts back to the 15-minute schedule.
Okay.
It was just more for an example, rather than to put down every...
Thank you, I understand.
I have a couple additional questions. Is there, I may have just missed it, but I was looking at your report for a cycle sheet. Is there a cycle sheet in here?
We don't have a cycle sheet.
You don't have a cycle sheet. Do you have an explanation anywhere of the assumptions with regard to dwell times at the station at South Orange?
We don't anticipate any dwell times, just loading and going. That was the assumption made in this. I don't think that it stayed in there, but that is the assumption. And I don't know that we'd even be allowed to, depending on...
If you'd be allowed to dwell there?
I don't know what the requirements are. We did not look.
Well, there'd certainly be a dwell associated with loading and unloading.
Sure.
Did you have a time for that, or for loading and unloading?
It was really just included in the estimate of the speed on the route.
So just whatever the computer spat out, basically? Okay. Have you reached out to, there are shuttles that provide service to the train station now, and the question came up, and it was a very good question about whether or not you would schedule the buses to meet the trains, adjust them to the train schedule. I see the need for a regular schedule. I guess, first of all, let me just get past this. So there's a shuttle that provides service to West Orange from the train station to and from West Orange, several different routes that they have that go there, and they kind of clog up the lot around the time that trains depart and arrive, mostly when they arrive because they're hanging around waiting for the train to arrive. But they have some experience in dealing with the traffic conditions in the afternoon especially. Have you reached out with them at all? Or to them?
We have not. We haven't contacted any of those.
Okay. We talked about express buses already. We talked about staging buses, where to hold them. The only other thing is that the timing of the frequency of the buses is, I think it seems like you said that there's not going to be any fee to the students. Do you know anything about the funding of the bus system, or is that it's already an existing bus system that you're piggybacking onto? So there's going to be some constraints, I would assume. You have to continue to provide the service that it already provides. Is that?
This was done independently of the Shoe-Fly system, the
Okay.
study specifically by St. Noel. As far as the funding goes, that would be a question they'd have to answer.
Okay. I love that name, by the way. Okay, no, that's all I have.
I just have two redirect questions.
Microphone.
On page 7 of your report, you have a table there. Is that correct?
Yes.
And is that based on...
They're not picking up, Mr.
And is the table based on
the schedule of student activity that was provided to you by the university by Mr. Marconi?
It is.
All right. And does that table have peak demands for student travels at particular hours?
It does.
All right. And down at the bottom of page 7, would you read that paragraph, please?
Peak capacity needs were generally in the $150 range approximately for most days.
Not dollar, 150.
Yeah, we understand.
Sorry. Approximately 150 range for passengers, not in there. Friday and Thursday at 10:30 a.m. had the highest peak capacity needs, 214 and 175 respectively, due to multiple classes ending at the same time.
All right, so that 214 and 175 is leaving Mary Lawn, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, go on.
Peak capacity for the start of classes occurred on Tuesdays at 8 a.m. at 158.
Read on.
Thursdays at 1 p.m., 155, and Tuesdays at 3 p.m. at 145.
All right, and so that's your testimony as to what the demand would be based upon the schedule that was provided to you?
It is.
And that schedule, again, was exactly what? That was provided to you?
It was what provided
That-
to us.
Which schedule was that?
The one on page 7?
Oh, is that what, Seton Hall provided the schedule that's
They did
on
the
page
schedule
7?
of classes, yes, that's what we based our analysis on.
Okay. Thursday, 10:30 a.m. So Thursday at 10:30 a.m., where do you get the numbers of 214 and 175? I don't see the 214. I see
Did you find it?
Friday and Thursday.
Thursday's the 175 at 10:30.
Okay, and the other one at
11:45, 2:40.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that 214, for example, represents what?
That's the end of class on Friday, 12 p.m.
That's the what of class? I'm sorry.
The end of class on Friday. The class lets out at 12 o'clock p.m. if you look right in the middle, the far right column.
Okay.
So 214 students are let out at once then.
And there's some of these are in blue and some in black. And what do they represent, the different colors? You have to understand, we just got these.
Oh, okay. I actually don't recall.
I'm sorry?
I don't recall why we separated the colors.
Blue appears to be start.
Oh, it's start and
class.
finish, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, that's what it is, I apologize. Yes, it's the start are in blue and the finish, the end, is in black. Thank you.
Bless you.
So are those 214 people leaving campus on Friday at 12 o'clock? Is that what I'm reading?
Well, that's how many people are dismissed from class at that time. How many leave, depends on what their personal preferences are, but certainly a significant number of them would leave.
Your assumption is that they're leaving, though, right?
My assumption is that most of them will leave within a reasonable period, within that hour. I wouldn't expect that they'd all run out at the same time. Classes will end different periods, but that'll be experiential too, But the assumption is certainly that most of them would leave within a short period of time, 30 minutes or so.
So these,
The testimony we had from the dean is different than this, and that's why I'm confused.
like
I think the
to-
testimony from the dean...
Just like to note that I think the record should speak for itself as to what the dean testified to, because
It
that's
should.
been said many times this evening, and there was a schedule provided, and I think that should speak for itself as well.
Well, it should.
Speaks for
But
itself, but
let me
Mr.
just ask my
Parlapiano is a
question.
board member, and he can articulate any kind of thoughts that he wants.
So my
That's our
question,
job.
so what the dean expressed to us was, and I forget the word he used, it was a new word to me, that the students arrive, if you're in the physical therapy program, you arrive on Tuesday, and you work your way through a series of courses that day, and you probably remain on campus for the whole day. And so when you look at, and I suspect these are the tables that you got to show classes, you know, the students in the physical therapy, I showed Tuesday, you know, their classes start and end throughout the day, but I think the testimony of the dean was they stay put, and that they work their way through a series of classes in the same day, so that then they're free the next day to go into the field where they have field assignments, right? And so I think we spent a long time understanding the schedule with the dean because it was confusing to us. And I think there's more to this schedule. So the class ends at 11, but I think those students then have half an hour off, and then they start at 11:30 in the next lecture, and then they have half an hour off, and then they start their lab in the afternoon, which is 4 hours long, and then they're finished at 8:30 at night. And they go through the whole day, and I don't think they come and go was the testimony. So my suggestion is that these aren't always comings and goings just as class starts and ends. They might mean they're all staying, and that could have a significant impact on the transportation needs for the site.
Right. We'd actually talked about that just at the beginning here, about how this is what he had to work with. This is what he based his analysis on. And I had asked him earlier if this is different than, you know, than what you thought, then, you know, how would you approach that? And so he's kind of answered that to the extent that he can.
So what it actually could mean is it'd be less demand.
That's right. There may be that's right, that there'd be less coming and going throughout the day.
Demand for busing throughout the day.
And that the days are very different. What the dean testified was that the days were very different. A day that was there for the physical therapy students, the occupational therapy students, they arrived in mass, they worked their way through a series of courses for the day, and they finished together. And it was kind of an intensive day, so that then the next day they could go into the field and work in a hospital or something like that, right? But they weren't back and forth all the time. So it's a very different, although it says class begins, class ends, my understanding from the dean was that they would stay through the day in a lot of cases.
Right.
But just please remember that the school, each of these schools is one school. There's about 5 or 6 different schools there.
I understand that.
And I think it's easy to...
Make sure you're talking into the microphone.
I think it's easy to overemphasize the intensity of this use, and by picking up snippets of testimony from here and there.
Yeah, I'm actually just, I'm
Mr. Parlapiano is just the opposite.
I'm suggesting it's less intensive, right? That potentially during the day, even though classes are ending and starting, in fact, the students are not coming and going, they're staying.
Well, I mean, the idea that we're moving 300 students over there in the morning, I think, is put to rest by the schedule, if you believe the schedule.
I don't know that's true, but...
Do we have any other questions for the expert? Mr. Skyer? Mr. Copley, are you?
No further questions.
Okay, so it's now 10:30. Let's see if we can move through this here with questions from the public. Yeah, somebody is already standing up there.
Cedric Cranko, 104 Scotland Road. Can you go into a little bit more detail about the bus size and the capacity?
The bus sizes, there's certainly some fluidity in that answer, but we estimated between 26 and 34 passengers. That's a mid-duty bus that would work well in this environment. The size could be anywhere from, again, it depends, about about 30 feet long, give or take, could be 26 feet, could be to 32 or 34 feet, but it's variable.
Okay, so and you're saying you would stack, say, 4 buses at 30 feet each, like at Seton Hall, and then again at Mary Lawn? So that would be 120 feet long row of buses at one point?
That is certainly one option. If you did 4 buses, yeah, you could.
I haven't seen the site plan of the Mary Lawn, but I would like to see the layout of the parking lot to see if it could accommodate 120 feet of just bus.
Well, that's what we've asked for that.
Yeah,
Yes.
But there was mention of 365 students that would be attending the school, with an additional 101 parking spaces. Is that correct? Is that the information you received?
There are 100 student parking spaces.
And how many extra students would be taking the bus?
Well, we based our analysis not on the totals.
365.
Yeah.
265.
That was what testified, that's different testimony. We based ours on the schedules that we had.
Okay, so they're two different things, two different numbers, okay. So by my count, if there were, say, 260 people taking the bus that is stacked, you would need to have 70-person bus in order to move that amount of people at one time. But your buses are only 35 people. So you wouldn't have to have 4 buses, you would have to have double that, you'd have to have 8 buses. Is there any accommodation for the amount of people being moved and the bus sizes?
That isn't the amount of people that our analysis showed that you need to move at one time.
That, well, 365 people is the amount of people that can...
But not arriving at one time.
Yeah, you really, I understand where you're coming from. I think we can get to the bottom of this. You need to look at their traffic report. It's available. They don't have, in this analysis, 265 people coming at the same time in the morning. It's spread out through different times of the morning.
Okay, but there was mention that there was 214 people coming at one class starting.
Not coming, that would be dismissed at the
Okay,
end.
so
And that's not
leaving.
from one class, that's from a variety of classes.
But at one point in time during the day, 214 people will be leaving at one time.
We don't know, in fact, that they would be leaving. As Mr. Parlapiano said, they may be finishing a
Then,
class
yeah.
and then have another class.
Well, even if it was 214 people leaving at 40 people per bus, that's 5.5 buses you'd need. So the math is a little fuzzy to me. One thing that you spoke about was enforcement. And you said that the students would have to follow the rules, or the detriment to not following the rules. Can you be a little bit more specific what the detriment to not following the rules was?
Well, what I was referring to is if there are parking regulations and you violate them, you, just as you'd expect, you get a ticket, you could get towed, you could get booted.
No, but you're talking about the bus and not taking the bus, it would be a detriment to
No,
not following the rules.
what I referred to was the penalties for parking where you're not allowed or entitled to. That would, if there are parking regulations and they're enforced, then that would limit where people could park and would push them more likely to use the bus rather than risk those things. That's a normal part of a transit operation where you combine those two components.
So who would be enforcing the students taking the bus as opposed to parking on the street?
I don't know that would be it would be enforcing how they get to, they could walk, they could ride their bike. There's no enforcement necessarily, it's the parking enforcement, so that they're not parking in an area that's not allowed. If there's a regulation, then you would want to make sure that it was controlled. That was it.
So if students are parking where they shouldn't be parking, or they park in the residential areas, Do you know who would be monitoring that and enforcing that?
No, that's not my area. I mean, whatever the entity is that monitors that, if it's...
Would it be Seton Hall, if Seton Hall would be monitoring and enforcing? I'm speaking to the gentleman sitting.
No, if there were parking restrictions imposed by the municipality would enforce those.
So Seton Hall is not...
Seton Hall doesn't have the police power to enforce a municipal ordinance.
But the residents will be penalized if if an ordinance comes into effect.
Well,
Due to Seton Hall
that's
report.
something you can express that concern about later on.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Sir? This is so.
Hi, thank you. My name is Daniel Peterson. I'm a professional licensed engineer in the state of New Jersey. I chair the South Orange Transportation Advisory Committee. I have 23 years of professional traffic experience. I have a number of questions for you this evening. Could you please describe the route from Seton Hall to the train station and then from the train station to Marylawn?
Sure, from Seton Hall, you would turn right.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, could the questioner indicate his address in South Orange?
I'm sorry, excuse me, certainly. I live at 167 Montague Place in South Orange. Thank you.
Okay.
They would enter the Seton Hall campus across from Center Street into the campus entrance, the main campus entrance, follow it through to the Ward Place exit, come out to Ward Place, turn left on South Orange, then turn left on Valley, go right on 3rd Street, turn right on Church Street into the parking lot for this facility, turn left out back onto South Orange, turn right back out on South Orange, and then left onto Scotland Road, and then proceed up to Marigold.
Okay, and the reverse trip, please.
The reverse trip would come back down Scotland Road and really do the same thing. It would come straight through where, Scotland Road would turn into Valley Street and then turn right on 3rd Street, and then...
Okay, and then from there, depart and then make a right onto South Orange Avenue and making a right on Center into the campus.
Correct.
Okay, all right. It would seem that absent actually the picking up and dropping off of students, either of those trips, particularly at the peak rush hour time that you're looking to move the most number of students, will certainly take at least 15 minutes. You mentioned that your buses would carry approximately 35 persons, approximately,
Depending, sure.
okay? And at a typical student, and we realize we're talking students, and that's in the absence of any ID check, that's something on the order of at least 4 or 5 seconds per student. So 4 or 5 seconds per student to get on, to seat, and to make the way for the next student.
Mr. Chairman, there will be time for witnesses to give statements and testify, I'm sure.
Are you going to make this a question?
Yes, indeed. You had indicated that 15 minutes was your expectation for the entire trip. However, would it not, under those kind of conditions, recognizing the traffic time, actually, in effect, actually require a longer trip time? Would it not? On the order of perhaps 20 minutes?
Based on our analysis, what we looked at, we estimated the 15 minutes.
Right, but that was in the absence really of understanding the actual traffic conditions here in South Orange under the peak hour, isn't it, sir?
Do you have that data?
I have certainly traveled those routes plenty of times.
We've all traveled that route.
Indeed
That's
we have.
anecdotal data.
Well, fine. It is anecdotal data. Very good. I'm just...
But you can't state it as a statement of fact.
No, I'm asking his opinion.
He's given his opinion.
Yes, he gave his opinion as a summary standard of travel under somewhat general conditions and including the loading time, which is a significant factor at both ends of his trip as part of his travel time, which is on the order of, at 30 students, at least 3 or 4 minutes. So that being 6 minutes of the trip, then he has to make that trip in no less than 9 minutes, moving in and through the traffic position, which,
Again,
thank you.
I mean, there needs to be a question mark at the end of the...
Please, you know, if...
Yes, I understand.
The criticisms that people are coming up with are all, most of them are pertinent, but please try to save them if it's just a straight criticism, or, you know, answer in form of a question like the other lady did, which was very nicely done.
Thank you very much. I do understand. Where did you anticipate you would be staging these buses in the parking lot in front of, near the train station? We're talking about the New Jersey Transit lot in front of SOPAC, correct?
We didn't anticipate staging there, more of a drop and go by the train station. It's a convenience.
Does your calculations, because you did indicate that the buses would be coming from Mary Lawn to the station and then going to Seton Hall, does your calculations for the bus usage include students getting on, going to Seton Hall alone and having nothing to do with the Mary Lawn facility?
That is a possibility. Students could do that. That is possible.
Okay. What does it cost to park on campus?
I don't know.
Is there anyone who can opine on that? Or my questions are only to you, sir.
Yeah, there will be a Seton Hall witness to testify about campus-specific
Is there any
issues.
parking fee you know of to park at the Mary Lawn facility?
There'll be a Seton Hall witness about all those things.
Very good. Okay. You indicated GPS in your comments. What does that explicitly mean? Are you going to have a bus wait time system at these various locations?
Right now, we recommend something similar to what they use now for the ShoeFly system, which is more of a tracking tool where you can pull it up online and view the location of the buses generally in real time, so you can anticipate.
That's like a phone app system?
Yeah. Yes, they have that now. It's web-based. I don't know if they have a mobile application or not, but...
Did you identify who would be communicating this information, or is this an automatic thing generated by the bus?
The GPS system, there's a GPS tracker on the bus, and it transmits data via cellular data to the internet, and that's how it's translated to the website.
Okay. Are you aware of the parking regulations in the vicinity of the Mary Lawn campus?
No, that wasn't part of our scope.
No, I see. Okay. So in your diversion analysis, you didn't consider the absence of parking regulations that would be prevalent on the Montrose side of Scotland, I assume, correct?
No parking regulations were studied on our part.
Okay. So therefore, the addition of those would actually be something, perhaps that would have to be added, the presence of parking regulations, otherwise the students would advantage themselves in that capacity?
I really couldn't comment on that. We were focused on the shuttle bus operations.
Yes, I see. Okay. You mentioned that all the students would basically, I'm sorry, one of the council members mentioned that the students would stay during the day for certainly some of these classes. Did you anticipate a significant quantity of lunchtime traffic?
We anticipated that some certainly would. There's also going to be food facilities on the campus, and I certainly don't know.
On the Seton Hall campus?
Or no, on the Maryland.
On the Maryland campus.
There's some amount of refreshments, and people can bring their lunches. We just assumed a mix.
The staging that you mentioned at Mary Lawn, you indicated that you did not have any understanding of the arrangement of the parking lot where the buses would necessarily stage, multiple buses staging, for instance, for the Friday afternoon exodus from the campus, correct?
Right. We don't know specifically where that would occur in the parking lot.
Was there any consideration of the movement of the buses through the Mary Lawn campus and their interference with the ability of those who are endeavoring to park on the campus?
Well, we certainly wouldn't recommend that any buses would conflict with the vehicles. They would have to move around those vehicles, and that would be part of the development on that campus to make sure there was a bus lane.
If those conflicts were significant, would that not perhaps suggest that the buses then actually stage outside of the Mary Lawn campus? Was that all something that was in your consideration?
I don't think you'd make that assumption. No, I don't think that I think that's not something that I would know about the site plan. I mean, certainly having the buses in the parking lot is what our assumption is right now.
Okay. Returning to the absence of consideration of the lack of regulations on the Montrose side, was there any also consideration of regulations and the effect of student parking in our neighboring community of Orange?
No, again, we didn't study any of the parking regulations on Montrose or anywhere near there.
Was there any consideration of the use of the students of the use by the students of bicycles in traveling from the parking garage to the Marylawn facility?
We did reference that that could be an option, something to consider, but it was more of a, just a reference to it as one other option.
So that was not actually something that was germane to your study?
It was not.
It was not. Okay. Do you know offhand if there are parking bicycle rack facilities at Seton Hall?
I don't know that.
And Marylawn, do you know anything of that? Bicycle parking?
I don't know if they have plans to put them in there. That would have to be answered by Seton Hall.
It was mentioned bus shelters and the sheltering of patrons waiting to leave both Seton Hall and to leave Marylawn. Your calculations did not actually account for the number of persons, though you did indicate lines would be present. Would a reasonable number perhaps be 50 or 60 persons in your estimation?
It's just going to depend on the times and the usage and how people utilize the system. I don't know that we can anticipate how many people will be in the line. We did put the demand for shuttle service, and we certainly recommended the staging of the buses in the morning, especially when we know that there's going to be a specific demand.
The second site that buses are stopping on Seton Hall, where is that exactly located?
It's right near the entrance. I believe there's a residence hall there. It's on the right-hand side when you're coming in from that near the Central Avenue.
Just past the guard booth as you come in?
I'm sorry?
Just past the guard booth as you come in?
I believe so.
And the
yeah.
second location is near the parking deck, is that correct?
It is, across the street from the parking deck.
Across the street
and
from
the
the
rec
parking
center.
deck.
Yep.
And do you know offhand if they're sheltering there? Someone made mention of there being a building or...
That would be Seton Hall's decision if they wanted to add a shelter, but
Okay.
there's a building there, so there is some protection today.
Very good, thank you. That's all my questions at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Janine Bauer, 416 Clark Street, South Orange. Mr. Schuyler, why is the South Orange train station a stop on the route?
To provide transportation for students who are coming and going from that location?
Who are coming by train to that location?
That would be a reasonable assumption, yes.
The trains that stop at South Orange stop at Mountain, which is across the street from Marylawn campus.
No.
It's my understanding that not all the trains stop there, so to have a more regular schedule, the decision was made to provide transportation to the South Orange stop.
Okay. So all the trains that are on the Hoboken division stop at Mountain. So that would only leave the Midtown Direct trains, and some of them during peak hour stop at Mountain, although most of them do not. So the only buses, would you agree, that have to stop at South Orange Station are the ones that would meet the Midtown trains, either coming or going, that do not also stop at Mountain?
That is one option you could use. Sure, you could definitely adjust the schedule. As we mentioned, this transit system would have to be experiential, so if that is in fact the best scenario that Seton Hall would do, it would make sense. It could make sense to do it that way, yes, if that was already being serviced across the street.
Okay. Well, it's not just an option that I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting really for your consideration, if you would consider that, that it would be a complete waste of time to stop for any other trains at South Orange, because that same train would stop essentially at the campus. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, yes.
Okay. Do you agree that 5 seconds is an appropriate standard in the transit business for someone to get on and off?
Yeah, that's a good approximation, yes.
Okay. So at 5 seconds, if you assumed that, just to make the math easy, if you assumed that there were 30 students on the bus and 10 seconds for getting on and getting off, regardless of where they got on or off, the train station, Seton Hall, whatever, or going back, getting on at Mary Lawn to go back. At 10 seconds, that would use up 5 minutes of the trip.
I mean, I'd have to check the math, but certainly.
Well, 10 seconds times
Well, it would
30
be-
students.
Wouldn't have 30 people getting
300
on.
seconds, and 60 goes into 305.
Okay, I'll stipulate the math to you,
Okay.
that's no problem.
Thanks. And even counting the, well, let me ask you a question following up on Mr. DeScala's comment, who asked some of these components of the trip, I think, and then I forget exactly what your response was, but he said in response to your response, that's just what the computer spat out, and you accepted that. Do you remember saying that?
I didn't say that. I think
He said that, and
Yes.
you agreed with that, right?
What he was referring to is we provided multiple analysis for different miles per hour. We had, the information that we had allowed us to just use an estimated speed on an average trip. We do that often when we don't have the opportunity to look in the details and we don't know, when we don't have that information right in front of us. We weren't here. So we used an estimated time. And so I think, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think that's what he was referring to. We calculate based on 11 miles an hour. We also provided several other options to see what the difference would be for the number of round trips required at different speeds.
Is the 11 miles an hour made up of different components, one of which, for instance, is the time to get on and off?
It does. It considers the boarding, the deboarding, and the acceleration and deceleration, yes.
The traffic lights are included?
It's an estimate.
Did you have to tell the program how many traffic lights are associated with that trip?
No, it's a general estimate.
Okay. Is it generalized to this specific area?
We did look at the streets and in here, but it is an estimate.
What is the software program that you use to spit out these estimates?
Excel.
And did you put the assumptions in?
The study assumptions, yes, that was done by our firm.
Sorry, what did you say the software was?
Microsoft Excel.
Oh, Excel. Oh, okay.
I haven't seen a copy of your report. Are the assumptions that led to that 11 miles per hour transparent in the report?
The report, the way it's structured, it shows the different miles per hour, and then our assumption based on our discussions with Seton Hall and looking at the types of streets that were, that's where it's made. It's just a few sentences.
Okay, but it's not it doesn't show the assumptions that go into that. It just shows the various scenarios, like the 11 miles per hour and whatever other scenarios, and what that leads to. Am I understanding you correctly?
It does. It briefly discusses the assumptions, but it's not detailed.
That's all. That's all I have. Thank you.
Hi, Seth Leib at 297 Scotland Road. I live along the proposed bus route. I just had a question. Unfortunately, I haven't seen the report, so my question is directed to the types of buses that you're proposing. Are they using any, like either hybrid or energy efficient fuels or biodiesel fuels? Are they any specific in terms of the fuels that they use in terms of running along the route and emissions? As a quality of life, as living along that street and seeing more and more buses, now seeing with how many students are going to ride these buses, obviously there's going to be an increase of emissions. So I was curious if the university looked at more energy appropriate busing.
That wasn't part of our study, but I think it's also very early in this point to determine which buses would be used. The buses with 2013 emission standards are extremely low emissions.
Are you aware of the current buses? Do they follow the 2013 emissions, or are they?
I don't know. I don't know about the current buses, but I do know that those emission standards that are the most recent are extremely low in the particulates that they allow to be emitted from the exhaust. The addition to that is there's the biodiesel could be an option. Those are all possible things. I think they're all potential to be considered, but at this point, the answer to your question is it's just a bit too early.
And did I hear your testimony earlier correctly that the university will be using existing university buses, not adding more buses? Meaning, or did I mishear?
No. This would be additional buses.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have anybody else who wishes to ask a question?
Sandra Carrick, 105 North Ridgewood Road. I wanted to go back and talk about the bus schedule again. You talked about 15 minutes and then falling, or 10 minutes and then falling back to 15 minutes. So is that per hour?
No, that's the frequency, so how often a bus comes to each stop. So one bus would come every 15 minutes when there are two buses running on a 30-minute loop.
Okay,
and if there were three buses running, it would be every 10 minutes.
Okay, so if you added that up, that's throughout the day, right?
Right, a mix of that, correct.
So during peak times, it's 10 minutes, every 10 minutes?
Correct.
So that's, 6 trips?
6 trips.
And then it falls back to every 15 minutes, so it's 4 trips.
That's correct.
So when you multiply that by 8 hours, that's quite a number of trips, right? Okay. Because I understand that the classes are consecutive a lot of times, so you have a lot of buses running when there may not be very many students.
Sure, and I think if there was, the experience showed that wasn't necessary, there would be an adjustment on that. Seton Hall's always indicated that was the case.
Okay. And have you looked at the current Shoofly system and the usage on it, how many people actually use it, how often they run?
That wasn't part of this study because this is a very specific, route that wasn't covered by the Shoofly.
Okay, I'd just be interested to see what the usage actually is.
Yeah, I don't have that information.
Right. Okay. And you talked about remote campuses. You worked with remote campuses in the past, and this campus is less than a mile from Seton Hall. So feasibly, people could actually walk from the campus to campus, right? And it might make sense, they could probably walk there in 20 minutes versus 30 minutes of waiting for a shuttle.
I mean, I guess everyone has the option to walk if they choose to, but I think the service is being provided for those who choose not to walk.
Right. And has anybody done a study on how many students actually use the train system?
I don't know.
I mean, I think we heard that graduate students often need cars, and so very few of them would actually be using a train. And what about, have you considered idling issues with buses? I mean, I compare this to the West Orange shuttles that are being currently used, and I walk the neighborhoods very frequently because I have a dog, and in the morning I see many shuttle buses coming through, and they don't stay on the main roads. They cut through some of the residential areas, and then they sit and idle. Has that been a consideration, especially if you have 3 or 4 buses sitting around? And buses typically don't turn their engines off. They continue to operate and idle.
I mean, idling was not part of the study, but there's technology to control how often and to monitor how often buses idle, the same technology that tracks them. It is possible to use that, but it was not part of this study, the idling.
Okay. And I assume with part of the stick to prevent these students from parking on the street would probably have to increase the number of parking authority staff members. I had an issue with this with my street, and we had a lot of commuters parking on the street. And it was interesting because we finally, after several years, got signage to prevent that from happening. But we were always told that it was really a neighborhood issue to monitor it, and we would be the ones calling the police, not...
Okay, is there a question?
Yeah, the question is, has Seton Hall considered funding increases in hiring staff to if there were issues with parking on the streets?
I'm not aware of anything that they would be doing like that.
And has there been any consideration of during times of the year around here in the fall, the leaves are a major issue and really slow down traffic and cause issues with pedestrians walking through the streets, and same with snow. Has that been a consideration in your studies at all?
We didn't have a specific consideration for leaves or snow in the timing.
And do you know who's going to operate this system? Would it be staffed by Seton Hall
That'll be
people, or
determined by them.
would it be outsourced to some
That
private
would be their
company?
determination. That's up to the
And
university.
how is the current shoe fly system run? Do you know?
I believe it's outsourced.
I think the word that one of the board members was looking for was cohorts. I think you were looking for that word when you were considering one of your questions earlier. Can you tell me again the route around the train station? Is it on Sloan Street, or would you go to the parking lot behind on the SOPAC side?
No, you go on 3rd Street to Church, and then you turn into the parking lot, make the loop around, and then come out that little side entrance that's right here.
Okay, onto South Orange Avenue. Okay, that's a major traffic jam area. Okay, thank you for your help.
Thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay, very good. All right, so that looks like it's it for this evening. And just to summarize what's up, you all plan to go before the HPC, the Historic Preservation Commission. We'll hear from you at some indefinite time in the future about when you plan to resume the application.
I think, after we've been before the HPC, we will communicate in writing to the board about whatever changes there are in the application. And then if you would give us a date at that point, then we'll give notice of that date.
Okay. One of the things that we would want, that we've asked here for, is if it's still relevant when you come back, is where the buses might queue.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a list of, a number of things that were mentioned. We've been taking notes.
Okay. All right. Do we have any other questions, comments about the Seton Hall?
Just, if we can make sure that in that list of things that you include a breakdown of the travel time, what's dedicated to dwells and each length and traffic lights, that kind of detail that was asked by several different people.
Okay.
And so then, for the board itself, overall, we have our special meeting for Singular on September 30th, and then we have our regular meeting scheduled for Tuesday, October 7th.
There's not going to be anything on the agenda October 7th.
Well, at least there isn't right now.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions?
Just to confirm, Mr. Coakley, you're requesting to carry this application to a date to be set.
And we extend the approval time period accordingly.
All right, thank you. Good evening.